Good evening, members of the public, both here in person and at home, councillors and staff. I now open the Ordinary Council meeting of Monday the 21st of October 2024 at 7:05 p.m. I'd like to acknowledge the Noongar people of the Bodja, the land that we gather on today. For thousands of years, their connections to country has provided knowledge, guidance, spirituality and life. We pay our respects to this ongoing connection, as well as their elders, past, present and emerging. For the members that are present in the gallery this evening, I remind you that tonight's meeting will be live streamed and also audio recorded. And I do thank you for your patience that you've shown this evening. I would remind you that if you are making a public question or making a statement or a deputation to this meeting this evening, that we request that you take a seat at the table in front of you. Members of the public are reminded that no other visual or audio recordings of this meeting by any other means is allowed. That brings us to agenda item number 1. Agenda item number 1 is attendance and apologies. There are no apologies received. There are no leave of absences. That brings us on to a urgent business, which is agenda item 11.1. What I propose to do, this is a late urgent business item of a leave of absence for myself as a Shire President. What I'd like to do now is call for a councillor to move that in accordance with clause 3.4 subsection 2 of the Standing Orders Local Law 2002 as amended, to change the order of business to bring this forward to from 11.1 to the start of the meeting. Is there a councillor who's happy to move that motion? Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Is there a councillor who's happy to second the motion? Thank you, Councillor Jarrett. The motion, as written on the screen, is 11.1, leave of absence request. Do I have someone to move that motion that the leave of absence is allowed for President Coles? So before I do that, we've got a mover and a seconder for the motion to come forward to the start of the agenda. Is there anyone opposed to that motion coming forward? Motion is carried unanimously. I will now call for a mover of the motion, being 11.1, leave of absence. Is there a councillor who is happy to move the motion? Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Is there a councillor happy to second the motion? Thank you, Councillor Bishop. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried unanimously. That brings us on to agenda item number 2. Agenda item number 2 is public question time. 2.1, response to previous public questions taking on notice. Ordinary Council meeting 16th September 2024. Those responses to those questions are reflected in the minutes. That brings us on to agenda item 2.2, which is public questions. I declare public question time commencing now at 7:09 p.m. and I would ask Ms Vanessa Reynolds to come forward and ask her question.
Thank you. Sorry, this feels a bit odd. Vanessa Reynolds, Oakford. My questions tonight, I've got 2, are in regards to the Let's Talk Rubbish survey that's actually been circulated recently. So question 1A, what were the fully inclusive associated costs of Serpentine Jarrahdale waste disposal from 1st of October 23 to the 30th of September 24, not limited to green waste, hard waste, recycling, general rubbish and any other verge or booked collections, contractor fees, disposal fees, Kwinana Power Plant costs, Shire fees and staff costs? If possible, I'd like a itemised breakdown, please.
I thank you for your first question, Ms Reynolds, and I'd ask the Chief Executive Officer to provide a response.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Ms Reynolds, for the questions, and thank you for the question. I presume you're asking A and B at the same time, so there's points B as well, yes?
If I may.
So we'd like to take that question on notice if we can, Mr President. We can provide you with detailed breakdowns per financial year. It'll just take us a bit longer to calculate for the time frame you're asking for. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Reynolds. I'd like to ask your second question, please.
Second question relates to the same thing. What were the fully inclusive associated costs of waste disposal during the last 52 weeks that the Watkins Road transfer station was in operation, including all of the same things so that we're getting apples for apples?
Thank you for your second question. Again, Ms Reynolds, I'll ask the CEO to provide a response.
Thank you, Mr President. We'd like to take that question on notice as well, so if we can, and provide a detailed response.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Ms Reynolds, I'd now like to ask Mr John McEwen to come forward and ask his question.
Good evening, Mr President, councillors and Shire officials. Question 1. On the 1st of June 24, I took 2 samples from a V drain running parallel to Robertson Road because we suspected that a large volume of water had been dumped from Permapol hazardous waste dam. In order to get advice on how we could progress getting the water tested, I contacted a councillor via email on the 4th of June, requesting a meeting regarding dumping of water. The councillor responded by asking whether it was with regard to water in the V drain. I replied in an affirmative. I did not receive a further correspondence. I tried again by contacting a second councillor on the 21st of June. I did not receive a response whatsoever. I set up a meeting with the Shire officer concerning my numerous complaints relating to noise, dust, breaches of working hours, and newly implemented rubbish that Permacast expects residents to accept as online noise monitoring tool. At this meeting, I told him in confidence about water samples I had taken, showed him photos and asked him about getting the water tested. He provided a range of reasons for his inability to get samples tested. Strangely enough, an hour after this meeting, 2 Permacast employees were standing along the flooded Robertson Road, presumably discussing the water that they had ignored for the past 4 weeks. From my 3 experiences, do you think I, as a victim of potential serious environmental crime, have received the appropriate assistance in the dilemma I found myself in, given that the Shire was involved in the review and approval of the stormwater plan at 394 Robertson Road?
Mr McEwen, I thank you for your first question. I'd ask the Director of Development Services to provide a response.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you for the question. So officers have and continue to action all complaints received regarding concerns associated with the approved development. Any resident concerns can be submitted to the Shire and these will be investigated in accordance with Council's compliance and enforcement policy. Your recent email of 3 October 2024 is currently in the process of being investigated as advised on the 4th of October 2024. Thank you.
Thank you for your response, Director. Mr McEwen, I'll ask you now to ask your second question.
Question 2. In our submission in December 2023 related to Permacast's request for retrospective approval, we provided a detailed assessment of their stormwater plan demonstrating the shortcomings of their calculations and the absolute inadequacy of their planning. Our submission was obviously ignored and the stormwater plan was approved with a few cosmetic amendments. On the 3rd of October, I provided photographic proof of the complete lack of planning and demonstrating that the stormwater plan was an abysmal failure. To compound matters, whoever tried to correct the mess created further havoc and mayhem for residents. Are private residents allowed to release wastewater from their premises onto public or private land? If not, why are the operations at 394 Robertson Road allowed to release a staggering volume of wastewater, potentially containing a range of toxins onto public land, notwithstanding that this also flows onto private land, where it is very likely contacted by residents, including children and domestic animals?
I thank you for your second question, Mr McEwen, and again, I would ask the Director of Development Services to please provide a response.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for the question. So private residents are not permitted to release wastewater from premises. Wastewater may pose a contamination risk to water resources or the environment and must therefore be fully treated as per state government requirements. Officers acknowledged your email of 3 October 2024 within 24 hours, advising that your complaint regarding alleged contaminated stormwater runoff would be investigated. Given the nature of the evidence that accompanied your complaint, it has been referred to the DWER Industry Licensing Branch with a request for their investigation. Officers are also contacting nearby residents to offer water sampling of 1, any drinking water source used within the main dwelling which is not mains water fed, and 2, any groundwater extracted via bore and utilised for irrigation or stock watering.
Thank you, Director. Mr McEwen, would you like to ask your third question, please?
Question 3. In November 2023, DERWA changed the classification of permacast and deemed it was no longer a prescribed premise. From this date, the full responsibility of controlling the facility was placed on the Shire. Since this date, I have made several complaints regarding the operation. The responses I received are as follows. I submitted photographs of dust on Saturday, the 2nd of March, report number CS10894. The response I received from the Shire was that they sent the photographs to Mr. Alberto Ferreira, who advised that they are compliant with their dust management plan, but that day was very dry and windy. Which is exactly our point. Permacast cannot control their dust when it is dry and windy, and they are too close to residences. I was advised by the Shire that my noise complaints have been saved in a tracking folder and a team of proactive noise patrols will take measurements. To date, I have not received any feedback or results from the noise patrols. I received an email on the 10th of June stating Shire officials visited the site to investigate the noise during a pour from Stressbed 4. Unlike DERWA, who could not determine if the noise was tonal, the Shire officials confirmed that it was definitely tonal. I was advised that I would receive a detailed report. To date, I have not received it. Point 4, we submitted our final numerous noise complaints on the 8th of July. This coincides with the completion of Permacast's Metronet contract. Stressbed 4 is not required for their current contracts. On the 29th of September, I was advised by the Shire that my noise complaints had been closed because Permacast had made technical changes and the plant is now quiet. No details of technical changes were supplied. The only change I am aware of that is Stressbed 4 is not being operated. No noise, the noise will return when they start up operations again. Do you consider that the action taken and communication from the Shire are adequate in any of the instances I've described?
Thank you for your third question, Mr McEwen. And again, I'd ask the Director of Development Services to please provide a response.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the question. The Environmental Protection Act makes pollution of the environment an offence which the state government environmental regulator, DWER, has statutory responsibilities over. If you are unhappy with the Shire's service, you can lodge a formal complaint in accordance with the Shire's complaint policy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Mr McEwen. I'd now like to ask Karen McEwen to come forward and ask her questions.
Good evening, Mr. President, councillors and Shire officials. My first question is...
Sorry, Ms McEwen, can you just please state your name just for the recording, please?
This is Karen McEwen.
Thank you.
My first question is, were Permacast granted permission to transport fly ash or a geopolymer concrete onto 394 Robertson Road?
Thank you for your first question, Ms McEwen. Again, I would ask the Director of Development Services to please provide a response.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the question. The Shire has not received any application seeking to use fly ash at the site.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Ms McEwen, would you like to ask your second question, please?
My second question is, and you may not be able to answer this, does the geopolymer concrete production process include milling or breaking down of fly ash clumps at 394 Robertson Road?
Thank you for your second
Yesterday, last
question,
answer.
Ms McEwen. Again, I'd ask the Director of Development Services to please provide a response.
Thank you, Mr. President, through you, and thank you for the question. The retrospective development approval issued by the Metro Outer Development Assessment Panel includes no mention of the use of fly ash in the processes.
Thank you, Director. And Ms McEwen, would you like to ask your third question, please?
Okay, my third question is, would the use of fly ash by Permacast change its status as a non-prescribed operation?
Thank you for your third question. Again, Director of Development Services, can you please provide a response?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the question. Officers would need detailed information to determine if separate development approval would be required, as currently there is no specific information as to what may be occurring. Alternatively, you can ask this question of DWER as they determine what are prescribed versus non-prescribed premises.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Ms McEwen, for your questions. I'd now like to ask Leah McEwen to come forward and ask her questions.
Good evening, Mr. President, councillors and Shire officials.
Sorry, ma'am, can you please state your name for the recording, please? Thank you.
And I'm Lee McEwen. Question 1. Why has the Shire asked DERWA whether Permacast can use fly ash or a geopolymer concrete at 394 Robertson Road rather than making the decision themselves, since it is not a prescribed premise?
Thank you for your question. Director of Development Services, can you please provide a response?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for the question. So officers are not aware of any communication between the Shire and DWER regarding fly ash. I'd just like to extend that if you would like to discuss this further, officers are always happy to meet with you to understand your concerns further.
Thank you, Director. Ms McEwen, would you like to ask your second question, please?
Will Permacast be supplying the geopolymer concrete to other users?
Thank you for your second question. Again, Director of Development Services, can you please provide a response?
Certainly, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the question. And I guess as you could appreciate, the Shire is not able to comment on the operations of Permacast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Ms McEwen. I'd now like to ask Troy Malatesta from Cardup to please come forward and ask his question.
Good evening, Mr. President, councillors and Shire officials. My name is Troy Malatesta. Question 1. DEWA advised Mr. McEwen that they were in consultation with Permacast and the Shire in developing a comprehensive plan on how to control the dust from the variety of different activities being conducted on the site, and inclusive of how the dust is controlled. Various activities include sandblasting, water blasting their castings, precast grinding, finishing of bridge beams, precast form cleaning using pneumatic chipping equipment or compressed air blow guns. And also cutting, drilling, surfacing, finishing of concrete products with chisels, hammers and chippers. Please, can you advise us where these activities are being conducted on the site, whether the comprehensive plan has been drafted and approved, and if so, will it be made available to the public?
Thank you, Mr. Malatesta. Director of Development Services, would you like to provide a response, please?
Certainly, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the question. So the dust management plan incorporates these issues and was an attachment to the Metro Outer Development Assessment Panel agenda, which considered the application, and that was in March of this year. This is available as a public document.
Thank you for your answer. Mr Malatesta, before you ask your second question, councillors, we have just exceeded, it's actually now 16 minutes of public question time. Is there a councillor who's happy to extend public question time for another 15 minutes? Thank you, Councillor Bias. Are you happy to second, Councillor Mack? Is there anyone opposed to extending question time for another 15 minutes? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr Malatesta. Would you like to ask your second question?
Thank you. Question 2. According to the media, Permacast has entered into an agreement with an entity called Capture, with a K, for a carbon capture process to be incorporated into their concrete. Are you able to describe how it is to be conducted and what other chemicals and equipment are to be introduced to the site to facilitate this process?
Thank you for your second question, Mr Malatesta. Again, I'd ask the Director of Development Services to please provide a response.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you for the question. And I hope that you can appreciate the Shire has not received any information or application for this activity, so is not able to answer those questions.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Mr Malatesta, for asking your questions.
Thank you.
I'd now like to ask Mrs Michelle Rich from Serpentine to please come forward and ask her questions.
Good evening, councillors and officers. Michelle Rich, Serpentine. My first question this evening. Is there a council policy pertaining to Shire presidents being exempt from paying Shire rates?
Thank you for your question, Mrs Rich. I would ask the Director of Corporate Services to please provide a response.
Thank you, Mr President. Good evening, Mrs Rich. Thank you for your question. Officers are not aware of any such policy.
Thank you, Director. Mrs Rich, would you like to ask your second question, please?
Thank you. Is there any open council resolutions exempting Shire presidents from paying Shire rates?
Thank you for your second question, Mrs Rich. Again, I would ask the Director of Corporate Services to please provide a response.
Thank you, Mr President. Again, officers are not aware of any such resolution.
Thank you, Director. Mrs Rich, would you like to ask your third question, please?
Thank you. Knowing how the internal systems of the Shire work, in asking this question, I am not asking for the private and confidential information of any individual. I am asking, have councillors been briefed by Shire officers since October 2023 with regards to any past Shire president having current or historical outstanding rates?
Thank you for your third question, Mrs Rich. Again, I'd ask the Director of Corporate Services to please provide a response.
Thank you, Mr President. No.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Mrs Rich, for your questions. I'd now like to ask Mr Bill Denham to come forward and ask his question,
Before
please.
I leave, I'd just like to point out on page 15 of tonight's agenda, a resident of the Shire has raised the fact that there is actually a spelling error under Road 2 in the table at the bottom of the page that states Junker Avenue. It should be Jinker, spelt with an I. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Rich. I'd ask Mr Bill Denham to please come forward and ask his questions.
Right out, Bill Denham, Carrick. Question 1. Approximately how many hours work did the Shire employees do in total so that the arrangements put in place could occur, i.e. the putting up a bunting, signage, etc. for the sporting event at Mundijong Oval on the 14th of September? Note, the Shire workers did a great job installing the bunting and the signage.
Thank you, Mr Denham, for your first question. I would ask the Chief Executive Officer to please provide a response.
Thank you, Mr President, and thanks, Mr Denham, for the question. As you can imagine, there were many staff from across the organisation working Wednesday, Thursday and Friday prior to the event, and then packing down on the Monday. We'll have to take the question on notice so we can get specific details of those hours and provide you a response.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you, Mr CEO. Mr Denham, would you like to ask your second question, please?
Sure. Did the Peel Football League have to pay any money to the Shire for the usage of Mundijong Oval and the facilities, or did the facility come under the seasonal hire from the Central Senior Football Club for the event on Saturday the 14th of September? If so, for transparency reasons, how much did Peel Football League pay?
Thank you for your second question, Mr Denham. I would ask the Director of Corporate Services to please provide a response.
Thank you, Mr President. Good evening, Mr Denham. Thank you for your question. The Shire's seasonal fees and charges for Mundijong Central Football Club is for the period March to September. Given the event on 14 September 2024 occurred within the seasonal hire period, no additional charges were applied.
Thank you, Director. Mr Denham, would you like to ask your third question, please?
Sure. Did a current senior officer at the SJ Shire involved in the arrangements of the events on Saturday the 14th September at Mundijong Oval previously work for the City of Mandurah?
Thank you for your third question, Mr Denham. This time I'd ask the Chief Executive Officer to please provide a response.
Thanks, Mr President. As I said before, many officers from across the organisation were involved in ensuring the activities that occurred on the 14th September for both football and netball went as well as they possibly could, given the age and capacity of the football and netball facilities at Mundijong. I'm sorry if that impacted negatively on netball, and given netball booked the facility as part of the seasonal hire arrangements, and we're grateful that there were some compromises made to accommodate those. However, final decisions regarding this day were made by senior officers, and I'm happy to meet with you and go through that if you'd like.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr CEO, and thank you, Mr Denham, for your questions. Councillors, there is still 10 minutes left of question time. I'd now open up to members of the public on the floor. If anyone would like to come forward and ask a question. Mrs Rich, would you like to come forward and ask a question? And as Mrs Rich is making her way up, this is not directed at her specifically, but I'd ask all members of the public that are coming forward to ask a question to remember the question not to be directed negatively towards staff or to councillors. Thank you, Mrs Rich.
Thank you. Michelle Rich Serpentine. I note that the councillors' gift register on the Shire's website has not been updated to include Councillor Duggan and Councillor Mack's attendance at a local Labor Party election fundraiser. Was the attendance fee a gift paid for by the ratepayers of Serpentine Jarrahdale, or self-funded by the councillors?
Thank you, Mrs Rich, for your question. We'll take that question on notice. Thank you. Did you have another question?
Thank you. Yes, I do. Can the Shire please provide a list of all Watercorp owned or controlled bridge infrastructure on Shire-controlled local roads, including location, age, current weight restrictions, any known proposed weight restriction changes, and the width of the infrastructure, please?
Thank you for the question, Mrs Rich. That one will definitely need to be taken on notice and an answer will be provided in due course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Rich. Members of the public, there's still 8 minutes left of public question time. That Mrs Reynolds, please come forward and ask your question.
Thank you. Vanessa Reynolds, Oakford. My last question tonight is, have there been any expenses incurred by any of the awards that have been applied for or received by the Shire in the past 12 months? This includes preparation of submission, staff wages, councillor fees, tickets to the events for the receipt of the awards. And if so, could it please have a full breakdown of the costs associated with each award or application?
Thank you for your question, Mrs Reynolds. That will need to be taken on notice for the answer provided in due course.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Members of the public, is there anyone else who would like to come forward and ask a question? Thank you, Mr Atwell. Please come forward.
Thank you, Dave Atwell. I'm going to be pedantic again. It was me who brought up Jinko Way. I've also got another little question here. If it's possible, on page 27, the naming of the roads, Road 3 is asked to be called Ranch Road, which is not really in cohesion with the rest of the place. I mean, ranch is an American term, not an Australian term. The rest is all, I know it's a bit pedantic, but I don't think it's quite appropriate that we use American names on if we're sticking with local stuff. Thank you. So, yeah, my question is, can you approach them to do something about it, maybe, possibly?
Thank you for your question, Mr Atwell, and the councillors have heard your question. Members of the public, does anyone else like to come forward and ask a question? That being the case, I declare question time closed at 7:35 p.m, and that brings us on to agenda item, where are we? brings on to agenda item number 3, which is public statement time. Public statement time will now commence at 7:35 p.m. And I'd like to ask Mr. John McEwen from Cardup to please come forward and make your statement.
Good evening, Mr. President, Councillor and Shire officials. My name is John McEwen, and as you know, I live 100 metres from 394 Robertson Road in a property we purchased nearly 24 years ago, an ideal place for us to raise our family and spend the rest of our lives in a home and garden we love. As we head to the first quarter of the 21st century, apparently with advancing technology, coupled with a massive increase in population in the Byford area, one would expect the environment regulations to follow suit, but this is just the contrary. Environmental issues are being treated similar to standards acceptable to those living in an industrial revolution. The more I see and understand what is happening in my area, the more I understand the words of a Shire councillor who revealed that the crimes committed in relation to 394 Robertson Road are at least as big as those committed in the WA Inc. controversy in 1991. I am unsure whether these will ever be investigated, but I hope that in time justice will be served. A Shire officer who has since resigned from her position advised us that very powerful entities were involved at 394 Robertson Road and we had no chance of succeeding in our opposition to development. She was, of course, right. Very few houses used to come up for sale in our area. However, over the past 6 months, several families living on Carborough Road, including Norm Ainsley Anderson, our next-door neighbour and friend, have sold up and left the area. Our community is in trouble. When the term heavy industry is removed and these industries are now called general industry, we are in trouble. When several heavy industries are allowed to develop and operate on small pieces of land close to residences and designated for light industry, we are in trouble. When the state government allocates a company that has no license to build or operate and is illegally operating a heavy industry and causing environmental and social issues, granted a $100 million contract, we are in trouble. When the piece of equipment that causes the most vibration and noise and distress, in fact owned by the Perth Transport Authority, according to the company's lawyer, we are in trouble. We had good solid environmental regulation and laws. However, without the political will to apply the laws and regulations, they are completely useless. A famous quote by H. Arendt perfectly describes the plan of action of the companies occupying 394 Robertson Road and complicit officials that deal with breaches and approvals. Constant lying is not aimed at making people believe a lie, but ensuring that no one believes anything anymore. The speaker that will be following me are my daughter Leah and her boyfriend Troy. They both completed chemical engineering degrees. My daughter completed a double degree. Her second degree is in finance. Troy recently completed his PhD in sustainable energy. They have assisted in our calculation and reviews of these operations. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. McEwen. I'd now like to ask Karen McEwen to come forward and make her statement.
Can we swap it to Leah?
I'd now like to ask Leah McEwen to come forward and make a statement. Just before you start, Mr. McEwen, there is a statement that's been submitted under Karen's name and another statement under your name. So are you reading only the one under your name?
Yes, just the one under my name.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. President, councillors and Shire officials. My name is Leah McEwen. John and Karen McEwen are my parents. 440 Soldiers Road is my family home and I've lived there for most of my life. My statement is a continuation of my father's. This community is in trouble. When all 9 councillors vote unanimously against the granting of retrospective approval for Permacast, and then the next week the Shire President voted against this ruling at the MODAP meeting. And when asked to explain her actions, she replied, "You don't understand politics. We are in trouble." When piecemeal retrospective approvals are accepted for the various operations at 394 Robertson Road, rather than considering the entire operation, which is a huge environmental catastrophe, we are in trouble. When the Shire advises that requests for comment regarding retrospective approval for the laydown area has been sent to people living 500 metres away. Our home is one of the closest to 394 Robertson Road and is about 1 kilometre away from the laydown area, and we did not receive one. We are in trouble. Were requests actually sent to anyone? When a DOA officer asked my parents to remove their concerns about chromium from their statement in relation to permacast, we are in trouble. When an approval system is put in place which ignores the wishes of the community and their representatives. When the majority of approvers in that system, including the presiding member, do not live in our area, have not been elected by us, and hold high-level positions in businesses that assist companies to get approvals, we are in trouble. When MODAP is presented with overwhelming evidence of environmental and social issues, however, the presiding member chooses to cast a deciding vote allowing the facility additional time, we are in trouble. When the presiding member is removed from his position due to a conflict of interest, and yet their decision is allowed to remain, we are in trouble. When DOA changes the classification of a company from prescribed to not prescribed and then asks my parents to pay $35 to submit an FOI application when they request the reason for this change, when their FOI application is refused by the same person that made their decision on the not prescribed issue, when their request for an internal review is conducted and again refused by the same person, when their request for an external review has taken over 12 months and they have not received a response to date because they are busy, we are in trouble. When a DOA officer advises my parents that if this illegal company does not get approval and cannot operate, the state government will lose $50 million a day, we are in trouble. I am horrified at what my family has had to go through and that the voices of the residents in this area are being ignored, while the reports and statements from these companies are accepted as fact without due diligence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms McEwen, for your statement. I'd now like to ask Mr Malatesta from Cutup, please come forward and make his statement.
Good evening, Mr President, councillors and Shire officials. My name is Troy Malatesta and I stayed in the granny flat at 440 Soldiers Road with Leah for 2 years. My statement is a continuation of Leah's. This community is in trouble. When DEWA advises that the dust issues raised by John McEwen are due to a prescribed operation that uses highly toxic poisons in its operation, and said the dust was not caused by the company seeking retrospective approval, even though that John McEwen provided photographs showing that the dust was all over the operation. And they were advised that they will only send a letter of warning. We are in trouble. When DEWA accepts cosmetic changes by the companies at 394 Robertson Road that have no effect on the actual environmental issues, we are in trouble. When DEWA ignores tonality and accepts the noise compliance calculations that include the Bush Forever as an industrial area, and an area from which the only noise should be from the black cockatoos, who now unfortunately rarely inhabit the area, we are in trouble. When the company's stormwater management plan is approved by DEWA officials and the Shire officials without any checks conducted on the calculations and statements made in it, with no plans for monitoring the outcome. When the McEwens point out the issues to DEWA officials but are ignored. When the McEwens present a detailed statement demonstrating the impossibility of this plan to the Shire and have their statement ignored, we are in trouble. In fact, the same goes for all the documents and plans provided by the company. When a MODAP approver advises that the company has to be allowed to work on a Saturday because it will lose 17% of its revenue, despite the fact that this company does contract work and is not a retailer. We are in trouble. When the residents advise that work starts at 5:30 a.m. and the Permacast lawyer advises that these workers are admin and that the earliest start is due to toolbox talks. And not one of the Mojap panel queried these comments, despite the fact that there are scores of employees arriving early wearing high-vis PPE. And also, a daily 1.5 hour toolbox talks is very unusual. We are in trouble. When the company produces total garbage on its noise monitoring system, the regulating bodies unquestionably accept this rubbish and expect residents to accept it as well. We are in trouble. Permacast has now joined on the bandwagon of greenwashing, one of its new projects including an even more hazardous material than Portland cement, fly ash. Without the political will to administer and apply the laws and regulations that are in place to protect communities, the laws are completely useless. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement, Mr Malatesta. I'd now ask Mr Bill Denham to come forward and make his statement.
Bill Denham, this statement is in regards to the events that occurred on Saturday the 14th of September 2024 at Munijong Oval. It was a clash between netball and football games. A meeting was organised by Shire officers on Wednesday the 11th of September at 3:30 p.m. between Shire officers, senior football, including Peel Football League and Serpentine Jarrahdale Netball. Luckily, 2 netball committee members changed their work commitments. Remember, they are volunteers to accommodate the others attending, mainly for transparency and clarity reasons. Initially, the netball community, who are local ratepayers, on their grand final day were banned from using the facility's toilets and the public car park at the netball courts. This was to accommodate Peel Football League. Netball was told to park on the street and a little gravel car park to the west of the netball courts. Portaloos were to be provided by the Shire at SJ ratepayers' cost for the netball families. The Netball Committee were extremely unhappy with these arrangements as they had booked the facility months in advance and had paid for them. They had their annual Life Members morning tea on grand final day, and to expect elderly people to use Portaloos was ridiculous, and also park out on the road. A subsequent meeting was arranged, and when there was a question was raised regarding who was cleaning these Portaloos, the idea was quickly dismissed. Netball was now allowed to use their own toilets. That was the arrangement. But on Saturday, things were not as arranged. Netball had no access to the Acrod toilets, which are situated in the Atwell Pavilion. The Atwell Pavilion was fenced off by football by temporary fencing. Photos were sent to senior Shire officers on Thursday, and Netball was assured they would be removed. That's the temporary fence panels. This did not occur. Netball also had no Acrod parking provided. While on parking, Netball decided to provide their own Acrod parking on the netball courts, so we needed 3 bays minimum. We also decided to park committee members' cars on the courts to free up more parking space for the netball families attending. This is not ideal, cars and children, but it was monitored and it worked fairly safely. Other arrangements agreed on by the parties were simply ignored on Saturday. Working on the figures supplied to Shire officers by the Peel Football League, which, by the way, I consider it completely incorrect, 1,000 people attending football at $13 per person, $13,000 of generated income from the event went straight back to the Peel region headquarters, Rushton Park, Mandurah. Remember, the SJ Shire junior footballers all go to South Fremantle or the Perth football clubs. This is their catchment zone. No junior football development in SJ involves Peel, only the seniors. So in review, Peel Football League want to hold an event in Serpentine Jarrahdale. 4 games, 8 teams. Only 1 team playing is based in the Serpentine Jarrahdale Shire. The local junior netballers and families, nearly all locals, ratepayers, who hired and paid for the facilities to play their grand finals, are kicked out of using their parking and toilets. How is it possible for visitors to come, do their event, no cost, take approximately 13,000 gate fees back to their shire and get priority over our local ratepayers and their children. With me, I have a list of about 80 signatures of ratepayers unhappy or disappointed in the lack of support from the Shire on the local Children's Netball Grand Final day. These signatures were obtained by two girls, players, just walking around the crowd. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Denholm. I may have confused myself because before my understanding was Leah McEwen was coming forward to make a statement instead of Karen. Karen, did you still want to make a statement? It has been submitted, so I'm happy for you to come forward and make your statement now. Apologies if there's any confusion.
I'm Karen McEwen, and once again, good evening, Mr President, councillors and officers. The environmental regulators are failing us. Companies are prioritised over our health and the health of our environment. Alcoa's pollution of drinking water catchments with PFAS is a prime example. Of the many, many concerns I have regarding the operations at 394 Robertson Road tonight, I will bring two to your attention. One is the release of CCA. Permapol uses CCA for the treatment of wood. CCA is made up of 25% copper, up to 45% chromium, and up to 37% arsenic. According to the license issued by DOA, contaminated wastewater and runoff water is stored in a lined dam. The drains and pathways by which the contaminated water reaches the dam are not lined. When the dam is reaching capacity, the water is to be treated with lime and ferrous sulfate to drop out the metals. The dam is then to be sampled and assayed, and if the water meets the DOA specified limits, it can be discharged into the council's drainage system, i.e. onto public land and eventually through private properties to water catchment areas. The co-precipitation of chromium, arsenic and copper is very difficult. In the literature, even in stirred beakers in a laboratory, the levels specified by DOA, even in the best cases, could not be reached, despite using expensive oxidants such as hydrogen peroxide. It would be impossible to achieve these limits by dumping chemicals into a dam. This is a well-known and documented concern in the preserved timber industry, since treatment of CCA wastewater is an expensive process, although it is not for Permapol. I expressed my concerns about the process to DOA officers. We requested Permapol dam analysis from DOA. We were advised that DOA does not collect these results. Our concerns were not checked and investigated. This year, when we noticed that Permapol had released water from their dam, we took samples from the council drain system and took the samples to an environmental laboratory ourselves. The copper results came out just lower than the limit. Arsenic was around 10 times higher than the limit, and chromium was 60 to 80 times higher than the limit. Arsenic is poisonous, even in small doses. The misinformation on Permapol's website is irresponsible, and they should be forced to correct or remove their statement on arsenic. Long-term exposure to arsenic from drinking water can cause cancer and skin lesions. In utero and early childhood exposure has been linked to negative impacts on cognitive development and early death of young adults. Copper is poisonous. It is cumulative, which means that it is difficult for the human body to get rid of it. It builds up in the nervous system, causing neurological problems. The body tries to get rid of it through the liver, resulting in liver damage. The form of chromium in CCA is chromium-6, which is the most toxic form. This is the most lethal of the three toxins. It is a carcinogen, a mutagen, and is also cumulative. Chromium is able to cross the cell membrane and attack the DNA within the cell. CCA is a serious pesticide. Even in small or trace doses, these chemicals can accumulate in biological systems. Permapol should not be allowed to dispose of these chemicals into our water systems at any concentrations. All wastewater areas should be lined to ensure that these toxic contaminants are controlled. Use of fly ash. Permacast has recently entered into a joint venture where they trialled replacing part or all Portland cement in concrete with fly ash from the Colic Power Plant, professing that this is a low-carbon, greener concrete. Fly ash is burnt coal residue. Coal is well known for its dirtiness. It contains lots of toxic chemicals such as arsenic, barium, cadmium, nickel, lead, and many others. Could be anything. In coal, these are chemically bonded into the coal. When coal is burnt at high temperatures, the total mass is reduced, therefore the concentration of the toxic contaminants increase. The chemical bonds are broken down, and the toxic chemicals can now leach out of the fly ash and pollute groundwater. Permacast already trialled the use of fly ash in July, one of the wettest months. Fly ash is a hazardous material and contains more toxins than cement. Furthermore, the process requires substantially more water, our groundwater. The concrete may be greener, but the components are not. I request that the Council investigate and advise us of safety measures that will be put in place due to yet another hazard being introduced to this site. Permacast lawyers stated very clearly and several times that it is not a concrete producer. Yet the media coverage in relation to the production of this geopolymer and its other joint venture with Capture insinuates that in fact it is. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mrs McEwen. And again, I apologise for any confusion. Are there any members of the public who would like to come forward now and make a public statement? Thank you, Mrs Reynolds. Would you like to come forward, please?
My apologies. I am banging on the same drum again tonight. My statement is in relation to the waste transfer station. It doesn't take a psychologist to see that the Let's Talk Rubbish survey has been designed with a very clear outcome in mind. This survey cannot provide an unbiased outcome with the way the questions have been articulated. The survey does not provide the recipients with anywhere enough information to make educated decisions. The survey states 7 times that the cost of the option to reopen the transfer station will cost approximately $8 million and will take at least 2 years, and even mentions it twice in one question and option. It also states that these costs are substantial, significant, and reiterate the length of time that will be required to see any outcome, and asks recipients to note the associated costs before answering the questions. But it does not state anywhere what the current actions for disposal of waste cost. Then, in bold orange writing before the questions begin, it's again stated, it is important for residents to note that if a redesign of the Watkins Road transfer station goes ahead, the rehabilitation works and redesign will take at least 2 years to complete. It doesn't mention that the bookable service is a 2-month wait and we're constantly paying for dumped rubbish to be disposed of, perhaps because people can't afford to pay for more rubbish removal, we don't have our own facility, or can't wait for a bookable service. It's stated that the survey is open to all residents and ratepayers. How is that going to give us an accurate indication of what's required? We're asking the opinion of people who may be transient, may not live in the suburb in 6 months or 2 years, or offers that don't even pay for the service, that don't even pay for the services. Some may be minors or provide tens of responses from one household. The survey also refers to specific numbers of collections, tip passes and green waste vouchers, yet we're not provided with any information on what is even being considered to be applied to the new service. The survey also refers to different terminology when asking questions. 1, please note remediation and redesign of the waste transfer station will take at least 2 years and will cost around $8 million. The next question states, please note remediation of the waste transfer station, $8 million, 2 years. Number 3, the costs associated with the rehabilitation and reconstruction is expected to be around $8 million. Which one is it? How are we supposed to know? It also states the cost of opening this transfer station needs to be passed on to residents, but states nowhere if any government grants will be applied for, what the options being currently utilised already cost us annually, which would no longer be a required service once the station's open. Given that the two redesign options were presented to Council in August 24, are we to believe that the design costs are yet to be paid? If not, they're an expense that's been incurred no matter what option's selected. Where was the question asking residents if by completing this survey they felt heard? How is this survey genuinely seeking resident feedback? How can anyone justify spending $40,000 for the results of this and a delay of 5 months to make a decision? If you really aren't genuinely seeking resident feedback in order to actually undertake actions that align with the feedback, why bother wasting $40,000 of our money and even doing it in the first place? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Reynolds, for your statement. I will remind you and all ratepayers that there is a free text part of that survey, so if you do feel so passionate about the survey, I would encourage you and all residents and ratepayers that are either here tonight or maybe listening at home to get on, complete the survey and add their free text to any concerns that they may have. I thank you again for your statement. Is anyone else from the public who would like to come forward and make a statement? Thank you, Mrs Denholm.
Yeah, Bill Denham, just something positive tonight. A big thanks to the Shire officers and councillors in accommodating visits by the Labor, Liberal and the national political parties at state level. It's quite evident a lot of interest is being taken in the SJ Shire infrastructure and facilities because we need their grants. Thanks.
Thank you for your statement, Mrs Denholm. Does anyone else like to come forward and make a statement? That being the case, I declare public statement time closed at 8:02 p.m. and that brings us on to agenda item number 4. Agenda item number 4 is petitions and deputations. I'd now like to ask Mr Stephen Elliott from Urban Resources regarding item 10.1.6, proposed extension of development approval and extraction of timeframe for industry extractive lots 6 Banksia Road and lots 300 and 301 Boomerang Road, already come forward and make his deputation.
Good evening, councillors and mayor and council officers. My name's Stephen Elliott. I'm the owner and general manager of Urban Resources. We're a sand mining and contracting company that specialises in sand extraction for use in the construction industry. We've been in business for 18 years and prior to that time I managed a company called Rockler Quarry Products that's now owned by Hanson. In relation to this extractive industry, we've been engaged by Hanson to operate the proposed sand mine at Boomerang Road because of our experience in sand mining, and in fact we have successfully operated several other sand mines in the area on a similar basis. The operation of a sand mine in close proximity to other residents and properties requires careful management, and Urban Resources has specialised in carrying out these types of operation with minimal disturbance to surrounding residents. The proposal contains strict conditions that Urban Resources will adhere to, ensure that the operational commitments made by us or imposed by the council are carried out properly. All environmental approvals are in place with the state and federal governments, and the site has been ready and approved to commence works for some time. This was delayed by market conditions and the years of COVID, but demand within the Shire for sand is now very high, and the timing for extraction of this resource is immediate. Housing development within the Shire has increased substantially over the last few years, and this has fuelled a requirement for sand to complete new subdivisions, particularly west of the Mundijong Township and with continued expansion in the Byford area. The sand from this site will be mainly used to complete these subdivisions, and its close location to those areas will assist in containing the cost of development due to decreased cartage distances for sand requirements. The next available sand sources in other council areas are more than twice the distance from this area. Additionally, the state planning policy Basic Raw Materials identifies the site as a key extraction area, being a regional resource. DMIRS, Department of Mines, has confirmed the site's significance and supports this proposed extension. Urban Resources has just completed the earthworks on the first stage of the Mundy subdivision, as it's been called, west of Taylor Road, and it already has an award granted for the third and fourth stages. The sand for these works, if this is approved, will come from the Boomerang Road site. The extraction of this resource provides a significant benefit to the Shire as it grows, and I ask that you endorse this request for an approval to extend this development approval and timeframe for the Boomerang Road sand operation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Elliott, for your deputation. That brings us now on to agenda item number 5, which is the President's report. Good evening, elected members, residents and ratepayers. Welcome to the October 2024 October Council meeting. As we reach the end of an eventful year for the Shire, we also remind ourselves that we're heading towards federal and state government elections. As your Shire President, it's my role to advocate for the Shire to get the best possible outcomes for our community. It's a community that is growing rapidly every year. By 2046, our population is projected to grow to more than 95,000, and in Byford alone, more than 404 babies were born in the year 2022 to 2023. As I like to say, we'll have probably the size of the city of Gosnells by the time we reach 2050. So it's an exciting time to be part of a community, but rapid growth also brings challenges, particularly in terms of our community infrastructure. That's why we must take every opportunity possible to advocate to the government to help fund our key priorities. The past couple of months have been seen us just being able to do that. At the end of September, the Shire CEO, Mr Martin, and myself played host to the leader of the Liberal Party in WA, Libby Mettam, and Mr Paul Mansfield, who's a Liberal candidate for Darling Range. We took this opportunity to give Ms Mettam a tour of the Shire, taking key advocacy projects such as the Serpentine Jarradale Community Recreation Centre and the BMX track. She was also lucky enough to experience some of our worst roads in the process. I would like to thank the community members who took time out of their day to support the Shire during the tour to represent basketball, netball, thank you Mr Denham who's here tonight, BMX and the proposed trail centre in Jarradale. It was also great to host the leader of the Nationals in Western Australia, Shane Love, and Nationals candidate for Darling Range, Mr Morgan Bias, for another Shire tour just a few days thereafter. We also met with Tate Marston, the Liberal candidate for the new seat of Oakford, and Sean Ayres, Liberal candidate for Burt, during the same week. And for those of you who aren't aware, the redistribution of the seat of Burt now comes into Byford. The level of genuine interest that all our visitors, regardless of their political affiliation, showed in the Shire's projects and the challenges we face was absolutely fantastic. We're looking forward to further meetings with politicians from both sides of Parliament to advance our advocacy objectives. And last week we hosted the Premier and his ministers for the state government's cabinet in the community. It was a highly eventful day, another chance to raise awareness about the rapid growth challenges the Shire is facing. The Shire CEO and I firstly held a meeting with the Premier, followed by an opportunity for us to present to Cabinet on all our key advocacy projects. Later that day we headed to a wet and windy, Briggs Park to sign an $18.5 million state government funding agreement for the Kiernan Park Recreation Precinct with Minister Templeman. This funding will be used to advance the development of the multi-use sports pavilion, car park, road entry and the ovals at the Kiernan Park site. The funding is in addition to a $3.5 million already secured from the state government for planning and design of this project. It was heartening to hear Minister Templeman's positive remarks about the Shire and about our presentation to Cabinet earlier that morning. He even referred to Byford as the Nappy Valley for the reasons I spoke about just a few moments ago. I'd also like to offer my thanks to the Premier, Mr Templeman and the WA State Government for visiting our beautiful Shire. It was a fantastic opportunity, one that we really did make the most of. As the federal and state government elections approach, it's my intention that we make the most of platforms such as these to get the best results possible for the Shire of Serpentine, Jarradale and our community. We'll keep this positive momentum and the conversations going as we start planning for the trip to Canberra next month. On the 16th of October, the Shire was recognised at the annual Volunteer Employer Recognition Awards ceremony hosted by the Department of Fire and Emergency Services in Western Australia. The Shire was among 80-odd businesses and organisations from across WA who are celebrated for supporting our incredible emergency services volunteers. We're proud to play a part in helping those who give so much to keep our community safe. And it's my pleasure to show everyone here and to present to Council the award that the Shire received. So it's the 2024 Volunteer Employer Recognition Awards to the Shire of Serpentine, Jarradale, for the Shire having an employee who volunteers at the State Emergency Service in Western Australia. So that should be acknowledged to all the staff, and it's fantastic we have a member of the team here at the Shire whose volunteers for such a worthwhile effort. So finally, I'd like to acknowledge that it's actually a year to the date that I was first voted in as a Shire of Serpentine, Jarrahdale's first directly elected Shire President. During that time, I've worked to create stronger bonds between council and the community, and I know we've got a long way to go, but I'd like to think we are making some progress. The rebirth of the Council and the Community Initiative has enabled an increase in community involvement and has proved extremely popular. And again, councillors will be at the SJ Markets this Saturday, and again, a second opportunity to provide feedback to the We Talk Rubbish survey. I've also overseen changes so residents and ratepayers can now ask questions or make statements without prior notice, fostering a culture of transparency and inclusivity. The passing of motions en bloc is making decisions smoother and more responsive to community needs. I'll continue to speak up and advocate for a vibrant, caring and livable Shire, a welcoming community where everyone feels at home. Thank you. That brings us on to agenda item number 6, which is declaration of elected members' office and officers' interest. I have one declaration that has been submitted by Councillor Nathan Bishop. He would like to declare an interest in agenda item 10.4.2, which is being considered tonight on the 21st of October 2024. Councillor Bishop's impartiality or his conflict is an impartiality interest, and the nature of his interest is that he is a member of the Oakford Bush Fire Brigade. The extent of Councillor Bishop's interest is that the Oakford Brigade may form a part of the working group being considered tonight, and as mentioned, his disclosure of interest is impartiality. That brings us on to agenda item number 7. Agenda item number 7 is confirmation of minutes of previous council meetings. Agenda item 7.1 is confirmation of minutes of previous council meetings, being the ordinary council meeting of 16th of September 2024. Is there a councillor who is happy to move a motion in regards to the minutes of the OCM of 16th of September? Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Are you happy to second, Councillor Mack? Is there anyone opposed to this motion? Motion is carried unanimously. That brings us on to agenda item 7.2. Agenda item 7.2 is the minutes of the special council meeting of the 7th of October 2024. Is there a councillor who is happy to move the minutes from this meeting? Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Is there anyone happy to second the motion? Thank you, Councillor Mazzini. Is there anyone opposed? The motion is carried unanimously. That brings on to agenda item number 8. Agenda item number 8 is receipt of minutes or reports and considerations of adoption of recommendations from committee meetings held since the previous council meeting, which there are nil. Agenda item number 9 is motions of which notice has been given, which there are nil. That brings us on to en bloc. So as part of the Shire's efforts to ensure the efficiency and effectiveness of meetings, tonight's meeting will include the opportunity for matters to be considered by Council en bloc. This means that a group of matters dealt with in multiple reports can be grouped together, considered and voted upon as a single motion. Matters that are not to be included in en bloc decisions are those which require an absolute majority, matters to be determined behind closed doors, declared interests made in relation to the item, and deputations or statements made in relation to that item. Officers have prepared a list of matters that meet this criteria. I will now read those report numbers and titles and invite any elected member to identify any matters that they wish to be removed from en bloc consideration. Removing a matter from en bloc consideration does not signify objection to a matter and does not require the matter to be debated. Removing a matter from en bloc simply means that the matter is to be considered separately. The matters that have been identified for consideration en bloc at tonight's meeting are as follows. 10.1.1, proposed road naming application, Lot 26 Robertson Road, Whitby, and Lot 23 1408 South Western Highway, Whitby. 10.1.2, which I think was a comment that Mr Atwell made a comment of, so that one will be removed from en bloc because a question was asked in regards to that. 10.1.3, proposed minor amendments to local planning policy 1.5, exempt development. 10.1.4, Proposed Local Planning Policy 4.22, Development of Heritage Places and Areas, Jarrahdale Heritage Precinct. 10.1.7, Endorsement of Banksia Woodland Management Plan. 10.1.8, Proposed Scheme Amendment number 8 to Local Planning Scheme number 3, Normalisation of the Byford Central Local Structure Plan, the Lot 2 Nettleton Road Byford Local Structure Plan and the Mary Park Estate, Lot 3 Larson Road and Lot 3 Alexander Road Local Structure Plan. 10.1.9, Proposed Metropolitan Region Scheme Amendment, South East and South West Districts Omnibus number 5, Request for preliminary comment. 10.1.10, Project Plan to investigate options for a Shire Administration presence in Byford. 10.1.11, Mobile Food Process and Policy Review. 10.3.1, Confirmation of Payment of Creditors September 2024. 10.3.2, Monthly Financial Report August 2024. 10.3.3, Council Policy Updates for Live Streaming. 10.4.1, Local Emergency Management Committee Information Report. 10.5.1, Award Request for Tender RFT 06-2024 Supply and Delivery of Ferrycrete. 10.5.2, Rebates for Home Composting Systems. Could councillors please indicate if they wish to remove any of the aforementioned reports from the matters to be considered on block? Thank you, Councillor Mack.
Mr President, not something I would like to, I just want a point of clarification. I do believe that Mr Atwell's comment was around 10.1.2 and the Taylor Road development, not 10.1.1. Is that what you had said?
I have excluded 10.1.2. I'm not sure whether 10.1.1 was...
10.1.2 was what you excluded? No,
Yes.
that's fine. I was just double checking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you want to exclude 10.1 as one? 10.1.1 as well? No, okay. Anyone else would like to exclude any items? That being the case, can I please call for a councillor to move those items to be passed on block? Thank you, Councillor Mazzini. Is there a councillor who's happy to second the motion? Thank you, Councillor Jarrett. Is there anyone opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to agenda item 10, which is Chief Executive Officer reports. 10.1 is Development Services reports. 10.1.1, Proposed Road Naming Application, Lot 26, Robertson Road, Whitby, and Lot 23, 1408 South Western Highway, Whitby, which was passed on block. That brings us to agenda item 10.1.2, Proposed Road Naming Application, Lot 9000, 142 Taylor Road, Mundijong. Is there a councillor who would like to move a motion?
I'd like to move a motion, please.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan.
If I can look at the officer's recommendation, but with the alteration of 1D being removed, Ranch Road, and replaced with 2C, which is Pastoral Road, please.
I think Madam Secretary, can you say that again, please, for...
The removal of 1D being Ranch Road and replaced with 2C being Pastoral Road, please.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Is there a seconder for that motion? Thank you, Councillor Mack.
Mr President, we just make sure that what's on the screen is what the councillors are moving and seconding. So 2C has then been deleted entirely, so there's just 2A and B, as C's been moved up to D.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Duggan?
Yes, thanks.
And Councillor Mack as a seconder, are you happy with that?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone opposed to that motion? Motion is carried unanimously. We'll need a reason for the difference, please, Councillor Duggan.
The reason for difference being that it better reflects the community of which it will represent. Thank you.
Can you say that again, please, Deputy President?
The change better reflects the community of which the roads will represent, please. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to agenda item 10.1.3. 10.1.3 is proposed minor amendments to Local Planning Policy 1.5 exempt development. That motion was passed on block. Next agenda item is 10.1.4, Proposed Local Planning Policy 4.22, Development of Heritage Places and Areas, Jarrahdale Heritage Precinct. That was passed on block. That then brings us to agenda item 10.1.5, Proposed Industry Extractive, Lot 4 and 5 King Road, Albury. I think there is I'll read that out, that's Proposed Industry Extractive, as I said, Lots 4 and 5 King Road, Albury. There is an alternate motion that has been circulated by Councillor Duggan. Councillor Duggan, did you want to move that alternate motion?
If I may, but with a small alteration. So point P is to be worded, the road haulage route shall be limited to King Road, to Thomas Road, to South West Highway, to Abernethy Road and vice versa only. So the removal of to Hopkinson Road and replaced with South West Highway, please.
So as per the screen.
As per the screen now, thank you.
Addition of paragraph P for Papa in red on the screen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for the alternate motion? Thank you, Councillor Jarrett. Is there anyone opposed to the alternate motion? Councillor Mackey,
Not opposed, but I do have some questions, if I may.
Certainly.
Just to the relevant director, I'd just like to know, would this route have been through an assessment by Main Roads, and would we have had any feedback on the suggested route?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Mack. A Director of Infrastructure Services, are you able to provide a response? Or Director of Development Services? Thank you.
Certainly, thank you for the question. So if it was a proposed modified haulage route, South West Highway certainly continues to function as a primary regional highway. There would be no concerns raised. I'm quite confident with that from the perspective of Main Roads, given they would regard that as consistent with South West Highway being a higher order regional road. So that's probably all I'd need to state on that aspect.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Mack, do you have another question?
Thank you. And just one further question, just looking at the proposed route of King Road to Thomas Road, are there any concerns with traffic banking on that road?
Thank you for the question. Councillor Mack again, Director, Development Service, you able to provide a response?
Thank you for the question. The technical officer assessment remains that the haulage route should be supported as figure 10, which is on page 80 of the agenda. The modified route doesn't pose any immediate intersection challenges, but certainly we would just note that the officer recommendations saw no issues with the recommended haulage route as what is recommended by the report currently. But there's nothing for me at this point to suggest that King Thomas Southwest Abernethy would pose any significant risks for use by haulage from this item.
Thank you for the answer.
Thank you, Director. Again, I'll call if there's anyone opposed to the motion, the alternate motion as listed. Councillor Vice, do you have a question or?
Question, if I may.
Certainly.
Probably through to the Director. I mean no disrespect to Councillor Duggan, but I find the wording of P a bit clunky. I understand what it's trying to do, but is it clear enough in terms of the return trip back being clearly articulated enough for it to be included?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Vice. Director of Development Services, can you please provide a response?
Thank you, Mr. President, for you, and thank you for the question. My application of that kind of condition would be the reverse trip would be Abernethy, Southwest Thomas, King, and then southbound King back to the site. So that's how I sort of would read that condition and the use of the vice versa aspect as well.
Thank you, Director. Do you have a subsequent question, Councillor Bice?
No, just thank you to the Director.
Thank you, Councillor Bice. I'll call again. Is anyone opposed to the alternate motion? Motion is carried unanimously. And again, we'll need a difference to the officer's recommendation, please, Councillor Duggan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm happy with the reason of difference that's been listed there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan, and thank you, Madam Secretary. That brings on to agenda item 10.1.6. 10.1.6, proposed extension of development approval and extraction timeframes for industry extractive, Lot 6 Banksia Road and Lots 300 and 301 Boomerang Road, Albury. There has been an alternate motion that's been circulated today by Councillor Jarrett. Councillor Jarrett, would you like to move that motion?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mr. President.
Can you just make sure, please, that's reflected on the screen once the Minute Secretary puts it up there? And can you just please read it, make sure you're happy with that as your alternate motion?
Yes, Mr. President. So my alternative motion pertains to option 2 in the agenda, with the addition of C. The clearing of 11.2 hectares of Banksia menziesii and Banksia attenuata woodland, a nationally protected ecological community under the EPBC Act 1999, in predominantly very good ecological condition on the Swan Coastal Plain, will further exacerbate the reduction of foraging habitat suitable to the successful continuation of the endangered endemic Carnaby's black cockatoo, Zander latriosis, population in the southwest of WA.
Thank you, Councillor Jarrett. Is there a councillor who's happy to second the alternate motion? Thank you, Councillor Bishop. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? I'm opposed to the motion. Councillor Jarrett, would you like to open debate, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Banksia woodland provides habitat to more than 20 nationally listed threatened species. With the type of woodland itself being classified as a threatened ecological community of national significance. One of those threatened species that uses the woodlands on the Swan Coastal Plain is the endangered Carnaby's black cockatoo, a species found nowhere else on the world that critically relies on these shrinking woodlands to sustain their population. Scientists warned some 20 years ago of the perils that this species would be in should the clearing of these woodlands continue into the future. Yet here we are in 2024 with the Carrican Cockatoo Conservation Centre and Perth Zoo sounding the alarms. The Carnabys are starving across the Swan Coastal Plain. Mature and young birds are coming into these centres incredibly malnourished. This is coupled with a recent report from Curtin University's Professor Kingsley Dixon stating that the Swan Coastal Plain needs an additional 2 million endemic Banksias to grow and fruit and sustain the current Carnaby's cockatoo population. This is bearing in mind that these Banksias take 14 years to grow and to fruit to a suitable standard for foraging. Whilst I'm not against housing being built, and I understand the need for housing as someone in their 20s looking to buy a house, it comes time when we need to draw a line in the sand of clearing threatened ecological communities just to benefit us in the short term. A more sustainable solution needs to be found of where to clear this. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Jarrett. Councillor Bishop, would you like to speak or reserve?
I'll reserve, thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councillor Bishop. I'll speak against the alternate motion, and simply I will do so by looking at the advice given by the Department of Environment and Water Regulations. Now, whilst they are silent on the points that Council has just heard in regards to the black cockatoos or red-tailed black cockatoos, there is some advice here that the Department of Environment and Water Regulations has given in regards to native vegetation, and the advice is under section 51C of the Environmental Protection Act 1986 EP Act, clearing of native vegetation is an offence unless it is undertaken under the authority of the clearing permit. It is done after the person has received notice under section 51DA subsection 5 that a clearing permit is not required or the clearing is subject to an exemption. Exemptions for clearing that are required of written law or authorised under certain statutory processes are contained in Schedule 6 of the Environmental Protection Act. Exemptions for low impact routine land management practices outside of environmentally sensitive areas, which is ESAs, are contained in the Environmental Protection Clearing of Native Vegetation Regulations 2024. The Department has granted clearing permit on 29th January 2019 to Hanson Construction to clear 11.6 hectares of native vegetation at this location for the purpose of sand extraction. The permit is subject to conditions relating to the avoidance, minimisation and reducing the impacts and extent of clearing, weed control, site restoration, hydrological management, monetary contributions and offsets being a conservation covenant. And a copy can be found at a hyperlink in the report as given to councillors. So I hear what you're saying about environmental concerns. I also hear from the deputation that was given tonight by Mr Elliott. And for me, I guess in this instance here, I have looked at what the Department of Environment Water Regulations have given as advice to us as councillors, as the decision-making authority at this point. And I believe that the response from the Department of Environment Water Regulations is strict enough for this to be able to be passed, and I would foreshadow the officer's recommendation if this was to fail. Is there someone else who would like to speak for the motion? That being the case, Councillor Jarrett, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr President. Again, I just reiterate what I've said about the cockatoos requiring this vital Banksy woodland for their own survival and their species. I too read the report from the department, and whilst I understand the fact that the clearing permits were granted, they were granted some time ago before the current status of this species is really coming to light. And I cannot approve this proposal or support this proposal with that in mind. And I implore my fellow elected members to support the recommendation that I've tabled today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jarrett. Everyone, or all those councillors in support of the alternate motion? 6. All those against? Motion is carried 6-1. And we'll need a reason for difference, please, Councillor Jarrett.
Just disappeared.
Are you happy with what's written on the... Can you read that?
It just keeps reappearing.
It should be on your screen in front of you as well, if that assists.
Yes, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jarrett. Thank you, Madam Secretary. That brings on to agenda item 10.1.7. Once I find my list of things that we've passed on block. Thank you. 10.1.7 was, let's go to the item. 10.1.7 is endorsement of Banksia Woodland Management Plan. That was passed on block. That brings us to agenda item 10.1.8, which is proposed scheme amendment number 8 to local planning scheme number 3, normalisation of the Byford Central Local Structure Plan, the Lot 2 Nettleton Road Byford Local Structure Plan, and the Marrie Park Estate Lot 3 Larson Road, and Lot 3 Alexander Road Local Structure Plan. That too was passed on block. That brings to agenda item 10.1.9, which is proposed Metropolitan Region Scheme Amendment South East and South West Districts Omnibus number 5 RLS 1028, request for preliminary comment. That was passed on block. That then brings to agenda item 10.1.10, which is project plan to investigate options for a Shire administration precincts, presence in Byford. That too was passed en bloc. Agenda item 10.1.11, mobile food business processes and policy review. That too was passed en bloc. That brings on to agenda items 10.2. 10.2 is infrastructure services reports. 10.2.1 is road rehabilitation reserve projects offer, Hopkinson Road and Rowley Road. Is there a councillor who is happy to move this motion or a motion? Thank you, Councillor Duggett. Would you like to move the officer's recommendation?
Officer's recommendation, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Is there a councillor who is happy to second? Thank you, Councillor Bias. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? Motion is carried unanimously. That brings on to agenda item 10.3. 10.3 is corporate services reports. 10.3.1, confirmation of payment of creditors, September 2024. That was passed en bloc. Agenda item 10.3.2, monthly financial report, August 2024. That too was passed en bloc. Brings to agenda item 10.3.3, council policy update for live streaming. That was passed en bloc. That brings us to agenda item 10.3.4. 10.3.4 is West Australian Local Government Association local government election advocacy positions. I know there is an alternate motion that is being circulated by Councillor Mazzini. I am minded to break this down as it is a complex motion. Councillor Mazzini, I know you have two motions you've circulated. One, if it was to be left as one motion. You've also got an alternate motion if it was to be broken down as a complex motion. Are you happy for it to be complex matter even? Are you happy for it to be dealt with as a complex matter? And if so, would you like to move your alternate?
Yes, I'm happy for it to be treated as complex, and yes, I'd like to move the alternate motion.
Thank you. Is there a...
So, Mr President, just a reminder, we're doing one motion at a time.
Yes.
Yep.
So then that being the case, the first alternate motion as circulated by Councillor Mazzini would be to break it down, and the first one would be subsection A for alpha. So there is a alternate motion that is for subsection A, participation, council supports advocacy, position 1A. 1A is voluntary voting. Is that correct, Councillor Mazzini?
That's correct.
Is there a councillor who is happy to second that motion? Thank you, Councillor Bishop. Is there anyone opposed to that motion? Thank you, Councillor Mack. Councillor Mazzini, would you like to open debate?
Thank you, Mr President. Just before I start expressing my views tonight on these matters, I do want to make it very clear that I understand that what gets decided on in regards to these matters is simply providing our views as a council on Wagga's local government election advocacy positions, and we're just one member council of 139, and I'm just one person. But I do appreciate and thank you for the opportunity to take the time to explain my thoughts on the items and where my opinion differs from that of the officer's recommendation. Compulsory voting in local government elections has so many pros and cons. I would like to acknowledge the officer's recommendation on two very clear pros, increasing voting participation and making elections more legitimate because all electors are required to have their say. I would absolutely love if every person in the Shire and every resident in every local government took the time to actually vote and have their say, learn about candidates, their priorities, and take the time to vote. Local government is grassroots politics where most of the services provided and decisions made directly affect our everyday lives. If we were to have compulsory voting, I'd like to think this would encourage people to take an interest and understand what local governments do and what elected members do. However, it's my concerns that outweigh these pros. As the report states, WA and Tasmania are the only two states that have not introduced compulsory voting. I don't think this is a case of the usual wait a while WA. I think it's a case of making the right decision. What we see over east is party politics and local government. I'm aware that we have elected members who are members of certain political parties and have or are running in state federal government elections, but what I appreciate in WA and what I've found of most of these candidates is that they keep these ties relatively separate and of course disclose interests when required. Although I do of course have a choice and the freedom to be a member of a political party as an elected member if I wanted to, I don't feel any pressure to do so or that joining would necessarily provide me with any benefits either as a candidate or in my own role. I like my independence. I like being free to make my own mind up and having my main source of influence being the community around me and listening to what their needs are. I don't want to see people elected because they had the loudest voice backing them or the most money and resources available to them. I like that everyone gets a fair shot and anyone with a genuine interest and wants to make a difference has a relatively balanced playing field. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mazzini. Councillor Bishop, would you like to speak or reserve?
I'll speak for the motion if I can, Mr. President.
You certainly may.
Look, just touching on the pros and cons that have been mentioned, I'll just reiterate that each month we see impassioned members of our community here at these meetings speaking up on issues that matter to them, and I too am concerned that with the introduction of potential compulsory voting, we'll see the introduction of party politics, and those genuine community voices that we hear will be unlikely, in my view, given the financial backing of political parties that we tend to see. They're unlikely to take a seat at this table, and I fear that by recommending that we go to a compulsory voting system for local government, we'll see community voices drowned out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bishop. Councillor Mack, would you like to speak against?
Thank you, Mr. President. We recently had debate in here around our election policies going forward, and it was said during that debate that we wanted to go back to postal elections because we wanted to increase the amount of our electors that were voting in local government elections. The best way to do that is to make it compulsory for everybody to vote. I do hear the concerns around bringing in party politics. I'll also argue that perhaps they already exist, just they're more underground and it might actually bring them to light. I would also argue that it will increase the transparency of our local government and it will also go a long way to preventing any of the inappropriate activities that are found within non-compulsory postal elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mack. Does anyone like to speak for the motion? I'm happy to speak for the motion because I also support voluntary voting. And I was trying to find the Facebook post of a Member of Parliament in New South Wales, and it was a very sobering post because the Member of Parliament, I think, was a member for the North Coast of New South Wales. His name is Mr. Singh, and he is a member of the Liberal Party in that area. There's nothing remarkable about what I've just said, except for when you look at his post, he has a how to vote card for the candidates running in the local election. It is quite clear that they are either aligned with the Liberal Party or the National Party or a Conservative Party, and then the others are not aligned with that Member of Parliament's views. So what I'm concerned about, and I guess it's echoed by the other people who have spoken for the motion, is politics. And it's quite clear that some people in the room are members of political parties. I am a member of a political party. Whether I disclose that or not, if people ask me, I'll tell them what party I'm a member of. I'm involved in politics. Politics is important. I don't believe my membership of a political party affects my decisions in this place. The membership of a political party should not dictate how people vote in this place. If people are aligned with a belief or an ideology of a major political party, then well done to them, because I think it's important that people know what you stand for. It's also important that people know that you're transparent in your thoughts and your beliefs in terms of politics. I have never ever voted in this place by the fact that I've been told to vote a particular way. I certainly have never ever been told to vote a particular way by a member of the same party that I'm a member of. So what I'm concerned about is compulsory voting, bringing that in. It'd be quite clear that the major political parties would start influencing local government, and it may well be, as Councillor Mack has said, It may well happen now at a bit of a subterfuge type level, but the concern I have about compulsory voting in local government is it will unequivocally bring in the major parties. So I commend this alternate motion. Is there anyone who would like to speak against it?
Yes, please, Mr.
Councillor
President.
Weiss.
The framework we've been given here with the Walga resolution is a bit dogmatic, but one point that I do feel compelled to make is that something needs to be done to increase participation in local government voting as a first step, and then in local government more broadly. I haven't researched the numbers, but it would be very easy to go back and see what the turnout rate for the past few local government elections have been, and they're low. And I don't think council is enriched by having low voter turnout. I think we're better as a council, we're better as a community when the community is involved. Like I said, we're bound by a rather, if not this, then that kind of structure here with this resolution, and I commend Councillor Mazzini on her points. I guess I'm not so much debating against her, but against the framework that we've been given. My point, if I had to pick one, it would be leaning towards compulsory voting, noting the dangers that might bring. We could have party politics in a non-compulsory environment. This isn't the sole reason why that isn't the case. But I feel that beyond this, something must be done to improve's perhaps the wrong word, encourage greater participation in our local democracy, because that enriches us, it enriches the community, and I see this as a step in that. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Bias. Is there anyone who'd like to speak for the motion? Thank you. Councillor Mazzini, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to all the councillors that spoke then, especially Councillor Bias. I completely agree something needs to be done about voter turnout as well. I'd love to see, but I just don't think at this point in time compulsory voting is the way to go or should be supported. In summary, also, I'm quite worried about trying to figure out the whole enforcement debacle when people fail to vote. As a council that is quite concerned about money and funds, it probably cost us more in resources trying to punish people for that as well. So that's another issue. It also would take weeks to get finalised results, as it does in state and federal elections. But yeah, again, most importantly, it would encourage greater politicisation of local governments as it has in other states. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mazzini. All those in favour, and this is just breaking the motion down to part A, all those in favour of the alternate motion, please raise your hands. All those against? Motion is lost 3-4. I'm just going to pause here and ask a question. My question is, the overall motion is for us to make a submission to West Australian Local Government Association. Does that have to be unanimous by council, or is it just simple majority? Because my question now, and maybe this should have been discussed at the start, is potentially that motion there was 3-4, so it's almost split, well, it is a split council. We're now going to be advocating to something at Walga where the Shire of Serpentine and Jarrahdale 7 councils aren't in agreement. Can you assist us in that, please, Director?
That's fine. There's no necessity for an absolute decision in this regard. A simple majority will do.
Thank you, Director.
I might add that there's no compulsion on providing a submission either.
And that was what I was thinking, is that we've already commenced a process here breaking this motion down. So is it still an option for a council to then move option 2, saying there's no need for the Shire to make a submission if council can't decide themselves on each of these sub-points?
I see no problem with that process. A decision on any of these items has not been made yet.
Thank you, Director.
May I ask a question, Chair
Yeah,
President?
certainly.
I just want to, in a way, read the tea leaves and try and understand the nature of your question. You're concerned with council sending an advocacy position that isn't unanimous. Am I understanding that correctly?
It is, Councillor Bias, and my question is, these are very much, and I think Councillor Mazzini made a very, very pertinent point. I think the first thing she said is these were her opinions. I know we don't always agree on things, and that's a good thing about council, but if we're going to go as an advocacy position to potentially a lobby group, I don't know if Wild would like to be called that, but an association that represents local government in Western Australia to advocate to state government, and here we are almost split down the middle about what we do. That's my concern.
Can I then ask a subsequent question? Yes. Probably through to the Director or the CEO. As with this motion being defeated, no one's foreshadowed anything. If we simply proceed to the next item, lest one of my other colleagues jump in to move something, then that would just be considered a blank section of the overall motion. Council would just not have a position on that one item.
You happy to answer that? I think, thank you, Councillor Bias. I think as the Director of Corporate Services said, the Council hasn't resolved anything yet. So the Council either could move to, option 2 and not make a submission, or alternatively, an elected member could actually move the option to go back to participation being point 1B as per the officer recommendation, or move anything else that the elected member might want to move. That's the sort of options, I guess, the council has, and it could work its way through those individually, depending on what's carried.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bias. Good questions, and thank you, Mr. CEO and Director of Corporate Services. Let's move then to the second part, which is subparagraph
Mr. President, could I intervene, please?
Yes.
And look to move on that particular motion. Part A, participation, council support advocacy, position 1B, that being support of compulsory voting, please.
Thank you. Is there a councillor who's happy to second subparagraph A for alpha, which would now be council support advocacy position 1 Bravo, which was the officer's recommendation? Is there a seconder for that motion? Thank you, Councillor Jarrett. Is anyone opposed? I'd like to open debate. Councillor Duggan.
Thank you very much, President Coles. And I must say this is something that I've quandered over. I can certainly hear both sides of the argument. My concern is all about making our elections as legitimate as possible and getting more people involved in our local government. How do people come to us and tell us their concerns on a local level if they do not know who we are? Making compulsory voting means that people have to step up. The residents have to find out who their local nomination or nominees are, and they need to make a decision. And in that process, they learn our names, they see our faces, they ask us questions, or they make a decision without asking questions. That is to them, but at least they know who we are. That is the main reason why I support the concept of compulsory voting. I do hear the concerns expressed, however, I do believe that they are hypothetical. The facts that we have got low turnout rates speak to me louder than the hypotheticals. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Councillor Jarrett, would you like to speak for or reserve?
I'll speak for.
Thank you.
I'll just keep it brief. I'll just reiterate what Councillor Duggan and partly what Councillor Bias said before. It's very evident that our voter turnout is quite low, and something needs to change to really engage our community and all communities across WA, I should say, in their local elections. It's time and time again that I've spoken to residents and they're shocked that I am their local councillor, or letting them know that someone else is another one of their local councillors. They don't know who we are. they don't know the process of local government, and they don't know really what we're here for. Making that compulsory will I believe, and I think Walga as well believes that it'll make those residents engage more in local government. That's why I support the motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Jarrett. Did you want to speak against Councillor Mazzini?
I will speak very, very quickly, if that's okay, Mr. President. There's nothing that I disagree with what anyone's just said there. It's just I'm just far too concerned about party politics. I was just trying to find the Director of Corporate Services email just to confirm that. I think over East, that if a local government, an elected member is part of a party politics and they resign, they have to go and find someone from that party to take their spot, and that's a whole nother kettle of fish. So just things like that scare me far too much. I understand it could be a hypothetical, Councillor Duggan, but I just think it's something that's probable and will happen. So yeah, no, I don't disagree with anything that anyone said. It's just I think the cons outweigh the pros here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mazzini. Does anyone like to speak for the motion? Councillor Duggan, would you like to close debate?
Thank you, Mr. President. I do believe that there is already subterfuge political involvement in local government that is seen by the number of times we do see councillors go on to take on either state or federal politics. Our president in the Shire to the south of us is running in the next election as a candidate. Our current sitting MLA that covers our area was an ex-councillor. We have a current councillor who is nominated in the upcoming state elections. So I'm not denying that those underlying affiliations are already present. I do feel, however, that the benefits that we will obtain by supporting compulsory voting and a stand on compulsory voting will bring us closer to our residents, and that is what I feel the local government's job is to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan. All those in favour of option 1, subparagraph A for alpha, and this time it's support advocacy position 1 Bravo, please raise your hands. All those against? Motion is carried 4-3. That brings us then to sub-paragraph B for Bravo. The alternate motion that has been circulated by Councillor Mazzini is for Council to accept or support, I should say, advocacy position 2A, so that's 2 alpha. 2 alpha is the sector continues to support 4-year terms with a 2-year spill. Is there a councillor who is happy to second that part of the motion? Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Is there anyone opposed? Thank you, Councillor Mack. Your question or you're opposed?
I'm opposed.
Are you opposed? Thank you. Councillor Mazzini, would you like to open debate, please?
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I completely understand and agree with the points noted in the officer's recommendation on this, mainly on the points of reducing costs by having an election every 4 years and reducing voter fatigue, that avoiding the didn't I just vote mindset. So I understand completely. However, to counter that argument that it's saving money, I don't think in the long run this is really a true cost saver. Imagine an election where not a single elected member is re-elected and we've got 6 new councillors and a new president. As a councillor only elected in March of this year, you have no idea how incredibly grateful I am for the knowledge and experience of my fellow elected members that have been on council for some time. I lean on this knowledge constantly and I love taking on constructive feedback and being able to ask questions when I require it. If anything is going to ruin momentum and consistency, as quoted in the officer report, it would be the upheaval of an entire council. You could be forking out thousands of dollars on additional training, mediation perhaps, but most importantly, perhaps an entire group of inexperienced people with various motives making poor decisions that end up costing the Shire both financially and reputationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mazzini. Councillor Duggan, would you like to speak or reserve?
I think Councillor Mazzini has summed that up very well, and I'll reserve. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mack. Would you like to speak against?
Thank you, Mr. President. And I actually did spend a lot of time considering my position on this particular point. I guess I fell in a position where I supported the 4-year term purely on the cost savings that would be made available, and I did consider the option of the complete spill. We did discuss it at the Q&A, and it was suggested that in other areas it has been very rare for that to happen. But also, if it were to happen, it would reflect the general public's position of the current council. It would be their decision that they wanted a clean change, and then the community would have truly made their position available, position known. So yes, there is a con that there would be a complete new council, but that could also be perceived as being a positive and an option that is available to the members of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mack. Is there anyone else who is for the motion? I'm for the motion and I support the alternate. It's almost like, I guess, the analogy of the Senate in the federal system where you have half senators retiring or up for election every 3 years and the other half are there for 6. So probably didn't explain that very well. 6 years with them being offset every 3 years. So you get a 6-year term and every 3 years half the senators up. I think the reason they do that, notwithstanding the fact it's the state's house and they're there to represent interests of the state, is to have that consistency and continuity. And I think that's a nice little segue, I guess, or it's not the right term, nice little parallel with what we do here in local government. And as you can see tonight with a couple of mistakes I've made, no one is perfect. And I think it does take you that time to learn the role and to understand how to do the role and to understand how to actually achieve things. And it's very, very difficult as a councillor because going back to the first point about compulsory voting, maybe compulsory voting is good because then you could all vote along party lines. One thing about local government is you have individuals here, which I think is a strength of local government. You have individuals here who are on council to achieve certain things. They're here as individuals and they need to balance and compromise and almost be collegiate to achieve things. That takes time, it takes experience, it takes knowledge, and I think that half of the council up every 2 years, I think, is a way to support the system that we have. So I certainly commend this part of the motion. Is there anyone like to speak against the motion? Councillor Mazzini, would you like to close?
Thank you, President Coles. And thank you for reiterating a few, adding some extra arguments in there. No, I think I'm happy to go to a vote then. Thank you.
Thanks. All those in favour of the alternate motion, that is in relation to option 1, paragraph B, bravo, terms of office, council supports advocacy position, which is 2 alpha, which is a split, 4-year terms of this 2-year split. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 5. All those against? Motion is carried 5-2. Right, that brings us to alternate motion that Councillor Mazzini has already circulated in relation to...
Mr President, we probably need to get a reason for the difference for that motion. Given the first one was the officer recommendation covered, this is the first one that's been carried, which is a reason for the difference. So perhaps if Councillor Mazzini can do a brief reason for the difference.
Thank you, Mr CEO.
I will have a go. To note that the Shire would not support 4-year terms on an all basis, as it has the possibility to slow progress, momentum, and puts... Sorry, I keep getting out of screen in front of me. 4-year terms on an all basis.
Due to supporting consistency of terms or consistency of something along those lines?
Yep. Sorry, say that again, President.
Due to, to note the Shire does not support 4-year terms on an all-in basis to allow for consistency of elected members, or That's probably not the greatest wording either. Consistency with elected members. That may make... It's your alternate, Councillor Mazzini, so if you need some assistance, let us know, but I think...
No, I'm happy with that, Mr. President. Thank you for your assistance.
Can I just, maybe Director of Corporate Services with the look on his face, are you happy that... I know it's up to Councillor Mazzini, but does that...
I'd say it's probably not my place to comment at this time.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on then to the next...
Sorry, Mr. President, could I make a suggestion
Yes.
that it makes reference to ongoing knowledge from the council body to allow for consistency and ongoing knowledge
We'll have to ask Councillor Mazzini.
from the
She's
council body, how Councillor
Yeah, if Councillor
Mazzini
Mazzini's happy with
would
that. It's
feel
written up on
about that.
It's written up on the board for you, Councillor Mazzini, if you're happy with that. Or in front of you, as these new screens have.
Yes, I'm happy with that.
And
Thank you,
ongoing knowledge from the council body, so that they're viewed as a totality rather than individual elected members. That's my interpretation of what I think you're trying to say, but it's completely
I
up
might
to you.
just pause there because it's unfortunately it's not the Deputy President's motion, it's yours, Councillor Mazzini, so you need to... I know you're trying to help.
I don't believe we need the ongoing knowledge section. I was happy with it before. Thank you. Yeah, I think that keeps
You
it
happy with
nice and
that?
simple. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mazzini. Thank you, Councillor Duggan, for your assistance. Right, so now we're up to voting methods, which is option 1, subsection C, voting methods, council supports advocacy position 3A. 3A.
Mr. President, if I could please withdraw my alternate recommendation here. It was dependent on the compulsory voting section. So
Okay.
is that okay?
Certainly. So then now we've got a motion which has subsection A and B. Well, A was the officer's recommendation. B is the alternate motion that was passed. C, D, E and F are all officer's recommendations. So what I will now do is ask, we have now got option 1 has been amended with the 2 parts that have, or 1 part that's changed, which is only paragraph B, which is terms of office. That being the case, is there a councillor who is happy to move option 1, which is the officer's recommendation for A, Councillor Mazzini's alternate for B?
Mr. President, can I assist?
Yes.
So the council's made its resolution on point A and point B. So now we need to have a resolution on point C, D, E and F. You did indicate earlier you'd consider those, break them down as complex matters. So if you wanted to continue with that approach, you could just get a motion for voting methods and consider that in the same way, the officer recommendation or something else, and the same for internal elections, voter accessibility and methods of election of the Shire President.
So that would then mean D, E and F altogether, as opposed to breaking them individually?
No, I think your suggestion of the individual approach has merit, and I think even though there's not an alternative from Councillor Mazzini, maybe council would just continue with that process for each of those individual things. So potentially call for a motion from a councillor for, a motion on voting methods.
Thank you, Mr. CEO, for your advice. So that being the case, we're up to subparagraph D, which is internal elections. Are we?
Because Councillor Mazzini withdrew her motion.
She did withdraw. So we're back to C, which is voting methods. So that is A is first past the post, and B is the sector supports optional preferential voting. We do have the officer's recommendation for 3B, which is the sector supports operational preferential voting as a preferred voting method for general elections. Is there a councillor who is happy to move that? Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Bishop. Is there anyone opposed I am opposed. Do you want to open debate, please, Councillor Duggan?
Thanks, Mr. President. For me, it's quite simple. It gives people an option to say that they prefer one nominated member and then their second preference and so on, so forth. So to me, it's quite straightforward. I understand there is concerns about aligning with, once again, aligning with party lines, but I think our preferential voting worked quite well as it was presented at our most recent couple of elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Councillor Bishop, would you like to speak or reserve?
I'll reserve, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bishop. The reason I'm against preferential voting is, I was going to say one word, but it's not one word. It's several words, and that's the City of Swan. So the City of Swan had operational preferential voting for the position of mayor, and the person who got mayor, I think, finished in primary votes at about number 6 or number 7. The machinations of operational preferential voting can be good if it works for you, but overall, A, people don't understand it, and B, it is rife for people doing deals, and C, for the right person not getting elected. So on those grounds, I do not support it. Is there anyone else who would like to speak for the motion? Councillor Duggan, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. President, for your points. They are points that I hadn't considered, and if this motion is to fail, I nominate the non-preferential option for voting to support. Thanks.
Thanks. All those in favour of paragraph Charlie, which is 3, voting methods, council supporting optional preferential voting. All those in favour? All those against? Motion is lost 5-2. And do you want to foreshadow the other option, Councillor Duggan?
Yes, please.
So that would then be for voting methods, council support advocacy position 3 alpha, which is first past the post as preferred voting method for general elections.
Yes, thank you.
I'm happy to second that. Is anyone opposed? Sorry, do you want me to pause? Thank you. Councillor Duggan moved. I second. Is anyone opposed to the first past the post voting? Motion is carried unanimously. That brings on to internal elections, which is number 4 or Delta D under the motion. So currently the internal elections...
Sorry, Mr. President, my mistake. We do need a reason for the difference from the officer recommendation for the one we just considered.
Thank you, Mr.
From Councillor.
Yep.
Certainly, thank you. The reason for difference is to reflect the majority of councillors' perspective. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan. So we're now on to paragraph D, which is number 4, internal elections. The officer's recommendation is support advocacy position 4 alpha, which is the sector supports first past the post as the preferred voting method for all internal elections, so for Deputy President, positions on committees and the like. Is there a councillor who's happy to move that motion? Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Is there someone who's happy to second it? Thank you, Councillor Mazzini. Is anyone opposed? Is anyone opposed? That motion is carried unanimously. That brings us on to E, Echo, which is also known as number 5. Number 5 is voting accessibility. Council supports advocacy position 5A, 5B and 5C, which is A is electronic voting, B is postal voting and C is in-person voting. Is there a councillor who's happy to move that motion? Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Is anyone happy to second that motion? Thank you, Councillor Bishop. Is there anyone opposed to that motion? Thank you, Councillor Mack. Councillor Duggan, would you like to open debate?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think it's quite important that we offer our residents as many opportunities to make voting for them as easy as possible. So therefore, the voting accessibility is incredibly important, and so therefore I recommend the motion as put forward.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Councillor Bishop, would you like to speak or reserve?
I'll reserve for now, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bishop. Councillor Mack, would you like to speak against?
Thank you, Mr. President. And my objection to this will be the devil in the detail of what we're actually going to be recommending here. Our advocacy position to state that we're going to support postal elections, if that were to be considered, that were to be the favourable option and the sole option available. That would be of great concern to me, given what has happened in the recent history of our Shire. It's not lost on me that this week the WA Electoral Commission is once again before the Court of Disputed Returns after another year-long battle with a local government in dealing with mistakes made during postal elections. And to sit back and expect that things are going to change without us actually campaigning and advocating for some change, nothing is going to change. I do acknowledge that we have put through that we wanted to support the option 1B, which was for compulsory voting, which I think would go a very long way. But should that not be supported by all the other LGAs, as Councillor Mazzini first pointed out, this is not just our position, this is just our position to Walga in consideration with all other local governments in the area. And the worst thing and the worst outcome in my perspective is that nothing changes and we end up with voluntary voting and postal elections, because that would be an absolute disaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mack. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak for the motion? Thank you, Councillor Mazzini.
Thank you, Mr. President. I completely understand and note Councillor Mack's concerns here. As we've discussed previously, we've got terrible voter turnout. If we want to increase that, we need to make voting as accessible as possible. And I think that is going to be achieved easier with either electronic or mailed votes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mazzini. I will speak against the motion, and the reason I will is because it's something that popped up on the local government website today. Might have actually been through Facebook, and I know quoting Facebook's always a risk, but I verified this through local government and open media sources, and I took a screenshot of said concerns, and what the screenshot is in Victoria, there was a postal truck that had numerous bags of mail in the back of the truck, and that truck, so it's a voter ballot packs lost in Australia Post van theft, News Victoria, 18th of October 2024, and basically what's happened is voters in an area have had their ballots posted into a red mailbox. They've then been collected by Australia Post. That van has then been broken into, and numerous bags of mail has been stolen. What that then means is voters in Mount Waverley, so it's got the addresses, 8 post boxes in the Mount Waverley area, and Oakley, Mount Waverley, that now have to go and ask for another ballot because the ballots have disappeared. Unfortunately, this is all too common, and probably I'm not going to, I'll call it as it is. Councillor Mack and myself were directly affected by this. So for me, it needs to be in person. There are concerns, there is legitimate concerns about postal elections. And if we were to go to Walga now after a resolution of council asking for compulsory voting, it is quite clear. Just pause and think for a moment, councillors, what would happen with compulsory voting with people having their ballots in their letterbox? It's really interesting and sobering because people have already made the comment about people not knowing who to vote for at state and federal. People don't know who to vote for at local. So just bear with me as a hypothetical. I get a ballot, I get 3 ballots in my letterbox. So I've got four ballots in my letterbox at home. So I've got 4 registered voters. I've got no idea anything about the shire. I don't know who to vote for. My next door neighbour knows who to vote for. So I give those 4 ballots to my next door neighbour. How will that be policed? So not only are we forcing people to vote, we're forcing people to vote for people they don't know. We are forcing people to fill out a ballot in the letterbox. It just absolutely beggars belief that anyone would advocate for compulsory voting and then link that to a postal vote. It is absurd. Anyone else like to speak for the motion? Councillor Bishop.
Thanks, Mr. President. I'll speak for the motion on the same sort of vein, but simply by saying that I think it would be misaligned of the council to be advocating for compulsory voting in elections, but then telling people by this advocacy position that those elections won't be accessible to them. I simply think it would be misaligned of us to go that route, and hence why I support the motion.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak against the motion? Councillor Duggan, would you like to close?
Happy for it to go to the vote, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those against? Motion is carried 5-2. That brings us on to F, Foxtrot, which is, what's that, 6? Method of election of mayor, and it's not lost on me that it says mayor, but let's just say mayor and or president. The sector supports, as per the current legislation, is A, B is return to previous legislative provisions, and C is apply current provisions to all bands of local governments. So that is apply the election by electors method to all classes of local governments, whether band 1 through to band 4. The current motion, as per the officer's recommendation, which is option 1, is to advocate for position 6B, which is return to the previous legislative provisions, which is all classes of local governments can decide by absolute majority the method for electing their mayor or president. So that's basically council determines. Is there a council who's happy to move that motion or an alternate motion for that? Thank you, Councillor Bias. What would you like to move?
I'll move the officer's recommendation, thank you.
Thank you. And you're happy to second, Councillor Duggan?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? I am. Councillor Duggan, sorry, Councillor Bias, you'd like to open the debate.
Thank you, Shire President. I'll keep my remarks very brief. I believe that the local part of local government should be allowing communities to decide how they elect their councils, the makeup of their councils. The council should reflect what the community wants. And I opposed at the time the state government's reforms on those very reasons. I felt that ultimately the council and its format should be an expression of the community and what it wants for its local government. The state government has decided to go in a different way, but I support this advocacy position, which is effectively to return that decision making back to communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bias. Councillor Duggan, would you like to speak or reserve?
Thanks, Mr. President. I supported the motion to bring it to the table because I wanted to hear debate, so I look forward to hearing the other side of the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan. The reason I'm against it is simply because I agree with Councillor Bias, and that is it's what the community wants. There has always been a risk in local government with mates running on council, because the reality is you get enough mates on council, they'll support you as mayor or president. It is a risk. There is a concern that the popular councillor becomes mayor or president. That popular councillor is a friend or an associate or someone who council will support. Not necessarily because the community wants him or her, but because councillors want him. That is a fundamental problem in our democracy. Let me explain that even further. It wasn't that long ago in the city of Gosnells where they had a mayor elected, and I use that term very loosely, by other councillors. In actual fact, that mayor wasn't elected. That mayor was appointed by pulling a ballot out of a hat. And that's being a little bit basic. I think it might have actually been a ball in a bucket. Suffice to say, that person became mayor, not because the community wanted them, not only because the council wanted them, but because of luck. I would hate to work for a president or a mayor who is there because of luck. That's all that was. If people want to run for president, if people want to run for mayor, then it's their opportunity to stand up in front of the community and get the community to support him or her. That is a fundamental process behind democracy. It's the person that the community wants. It's not the person that the majority of councillors want. Let me say that again. It is not the person that majority of councillors want. It is for the community. The final thing I'll say in closing, I don't want to dwell on the point again, but we have just suggested that we want compulsory voting. We're now going to have compulsory voting. We're going to have postal compulsory voting. And now we want council to pick the mayor or the president. Not very often in my life I'm speechless, but I'm speechless. Is there anyone else like to speak for the motion? Councillor Bice, would you like to close?
Mr. President, before the closing statement, could I, as I reserved, would I be able to put forward a statement now, please?
Yes.
Thank you, and sorry, Councillor Bice, for interrupting. I would like to foreshadow the advocacy position for a popularly elected president if this motion is to fail. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Councillor Bice, would you like to close?
Thank you, Shire President. One observation I would make is that I'm not arguing for us, Serpentine Jarrahdale, to have a particular model. This is for the sector. So I understand that we don't want to blur previous experiences, for example, that may have been alluded to. I'm not expressing a desire for any particular model. What I do desire, though, is that power to sit with the community, because we sit in a very awkward position legislatively where the state government now says, once you reach a band 2 or a band 1, we will tell you how you will have your council. But if you're a band 3 or 4, then the community can decide. And to me, that is just wholly unacceptable to have that split view that depending on which band you sit in, you may or may not have a decision. My view is very much that if some communities can choose their model, then all communities should choose their model. I'm not advocating for us to be one or the other. That's a separate discussion to have. But it just strikes me as very strange that the state government will dictate a view to some, but allow others to have that choice. It must be one or the other. And I'm firmly of the view that communities should decide the shape of their council.
Thank you, Councillor Bice, and we've got Councillor Duggan's foreshadow. All those in favour of the motion as it is? Thank you, Councillor Bice. All those against? Motion is lost 1-6. And you're going to foreshadow, Councillor Duggan, the advocacy position 6 Alpha or Bravo? Sorry, 6 Alpha or 6 Charlie?
Could I just hear them again? I believe it's 6A.
It's A is as per the current legislation with no change, which is Class 1 and 2 local governments or band. Governments directly elected the mayor or president election by electors method. And then C is apply current provisions to all bands of local governments, apply the election by electors method to all classes of local governments, whether they're band 1, 2, 3 or 4.
I'll take advocacy position 6C, please, so that all bands are treated evenly. Thank you.
Is there a councillor who's happy to second that motion? Thank you, Councillor Jarrett. Is there anyone opposed? Motion is carried unanimously.
And we'll need a reason for that difference, Mr. President.
Reason for difference is to truly reflect the wishes of the community And to treat all bands of local government with equality. Thank you.
You might have to say that again, please, Councillor.
And to treat all local government bands with equality. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Okay, so now we're in a position where, and if you're happy to indulge me, Madam Secretary, we might just go through. So we've currently got 6 sub-motions. The first one is compulsory voting. So, sorry, go on, Mr. Seer.
So, Mr. President, so the council's now resolved on all those. So, unless there was another motion that the councils wanted to move, we could move on to the next item of business potentially.
Can we just have a look? So the first one was 4-3. Sorry if I can just trouble the... And then the second one was 5-2. The third one was 5-2, which is the same, obviously. Then unanimous. So unanimous was 3A, which was C, which is voting methods. Was that right? Which is first past the post. Yep. And then what else was unanimous was 4A, which was first past the post internal. And then 5-2 was 5A, B, C. Yep. And then the last one was unanimous, I think, wasn't it, for the... Yep. So what I would like to do now is move option 2, which is we do not make a submission. Is there a councillor happy to...
Point of order, Shire President, that would negate a standing motion and you'd need to have it withdrawn. I'm looking at the director to make sure I'm not telling a lie.
The ruling or the standing orders does allow for that negated motion if there is a decision of council to allow it. But if I could be given some time to find that clause, please.
I'm more than happy for you to do that, Mr. Director of Corporate Service, and I thank Councillor Bias for his assistance. Simply, without going into debate, I am concerned about us putting an advocacy position to a advocacy group where one of the decisions was passed 5-2. I just don't think that's a good decision of council when none of us... Yeah. Well, probably 4-3 is probably more relevant than 5-2.
Having found the clause and reading it, I actually don't believe it applies because we're not talking about a negated motion. You would need to rescind the last 6 motions.
I think we'll just move on, unless any councillor wants to suspend standing orders and we can talk about it, but I think decision has been made. It's been broken down into 6 parts of the option and the motion has been carried. If anyone wants to ask a question or anyone wants to suspend standing orders, we can then break it down and discuss it outside of standing orders, but that being the case, we'll move on. Next item on the agenda is 10.4 Community Engagement Reports. 10.4.1 is the Local Emergency Management Committee Information Report, which was passed on block. The next item on the agenda is 10.4.2, which is Terms of Reference Serpentine Jarrahdale Cardup Career Fire Station Integration Working Group. There is an alternate motion that has been circulated by Councillor Bishop. Councillor Bishop, would you like to move that motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. It's effectively the officer's recommendation with the inclusion of some points here. So it reads as the officer's recommendation, followed by subject to the following changes being made. The first point is membership of the working group by the Shire's volunteer bushfire brigades be limited to representatives, being a captain and one nominated brigade member of the Byford, Mundijong and Oakford brigades only. The coordinator of emergency services is removed from the working group, including as deputy chair, and also 3 times Deputy Chief Bushfire Control Officer Serpentine Jarradale are removed from the working group.
Thank you for moving that motion, Councillor Bishop. Is there a councillor who is happy to second the motion? Thank you, Councillor Mazzini. Is there anyone opposed to the motion?
Mr. President, I do have some questions, if I may.
You certainly can.
Just to the relevant director, I do note in the report it says that the volunteer bushfire brigades were considered as part of the community stakeholder consultation, and a draft version of the terms of reference was circulated to the brigades, and their feedback's been incorporated into the current draft that was presented to council. Am I correct in saying that that is the officer's recommendation, and this was not recommended by the bushfire brigades as a whole with these alternate recommendations?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Matt. Director of Community Engagement, are you able to provide a response?
Yes, thank you. You are correct. The draft terms of reference that is provided in the agenda papers is what was circulated to all brigade captains. And an extension of your question, it's of the view of DFES and the Shire that all brigades should be represented on the integration working group, while the changes to the Metropolitan Gazetted Fire District will have an impact on Oakford, Byford and Mundijong. Any decisions that are made by the integration working group, or when I say decisions, any discussions and changes to response area or operational responses to some or all of the brigades will have an impact. So it's of the administration's view and of DFES that all brigades should be represented on the integration working group.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Matt, do you have another question?
No, but given that, I'll be opposed to the alternate, and I would also, I guess, I'll come back to some foreshadowing.
Thank you. Councillor Bishop, would you like to open debate?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. As we heard from the Director, the introduction of the Cardup Fire Station will impact 3 brigades in terms of their areas of responsibility that will be consumed by the Metropolitan Gazetted Fire District. This change is fundamental to the service those brigades provide. It doesn't affect the other 4 brigades. Quite routinely, all brigades within this Shire are required to work with a variety of emergency services. This working group for me is with the intent of ensuring that the existing brigades with their areas of responsibility can integrate with the Cardup Fire Station in terms of how they'll operate within that Metropolitan Gazetted Fire District. It's not a training exercise for additional brigades to perhaps be privy and dilute the voices of those who have been affected. Obviously, I've declared an impartiality interest in this item, and the case being I'm well connected to some stakeholders, and that is the risk I see. We've got a brigade in Byford whose area is going to be largely consumed by Cardup Fire and Rescue's response area. They need to have a voice at this table. You've got a brigade in Mundijong who similarly, they'll have their area of responsibility cut by the response area of Cardup Fire Station. They need to have a voice at the table. You have the Oakford Brigade, of which I'm a member. Again, area of responsibility will be cut by the introduction of Cardup Fire and Rescue. They need to have a voice at the table. Allowing some 20 plus people into a room to figure out how emergency services are going to get together and work is just ineffective. In my view, it's a waste of volunteer and paid Shire staff resources. And I think this working group should be geared towards the impacts on the brigades, whose services will fundamentally change, notwithstanding that each brigade in this Shire is expected to work alongside a variety of emergency services, including Career Fire and Rescue. Sorry, I've just lost my track there. But effectively, the intent of this working group is to integrate those brigades and not cater to the Shire-wide emergency services. Everyone sit around, have a chat. It's to figure out how they're going to work together in areas that are affected. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bishop. Councillor Mazine, would you like to speak or reserve?
I'll reserve, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mack. Would you like to speak against?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Councillor Bishop, for your debate there. And I do hear your perspective on Byford, Mundijong and Oakford being key stakeholders in this. And I do refer back to the Bushfire Advisory Committee resolution when this came through from BFAC, that it was recommended that Byford, Oakford and Mundijong have a seat at a table. But I also note what hasn't been suggested here was that as part of BFAC, we also mentioned that Shire of Serpentine, Jarrahdale, Department of Fire Emergency Services and the CESM and any other representative seat the CEO feels necessary was also recommended by BFAC. The fact that we have gone out for the consultation with the volunteer bushfire brigades, I think it would be very risky for us to start making changes to this recommendation, which is at the 11th hour this has come through. There hasn't been any correspondence with members of the volunteer bushfire brigades, as we've just heard from the director, about removing the coordinator of emergency services and removing the 2 deputy chief bushfire control officers, the 3 control officers. How do all the brigades feel about this? It wasn't that long ago that we sat here and we had a motion that was changed by an alternate, which was around a telecommunications pole. And an alternate motion came through late to move the location of that pole. And it was revealed later that the next door neighbour hadn't been consulted, which was the very debate that I put forward at the time, that it was dangerous to do stuff without engaging with the key stakeholders and getting their feedback when we make alternate motions. So it is with that that I will put forward that if this is lost, that we return to the officer's recommendation, and obviously at that point we can consider any amendments to that if we wanted to look back at just the Byford, Mundijong and Oakford brigades in that to represent the original motion that was put forward from BFAC. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mack. Is anyone else like to speak for the motion? Thank you, Councillor Duggan.
Not so much speak for the motion, but if I could have a question answered perhaps by Councillor Bishop.
Yes.
Is the intention that the other brigades may have the opportunity, after reading the minutes of the meetings, which I'm assuming would be made public, that they can put their concerns into writing and those concerns can be tabled and answered at the next meeting? Similar to with our OCMs, we have Q&A and deputation times, please.
Thank you for the question. I'll go to Councillor Bishop first. Are you able to answer that question?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Duggan. The other brigades have a variety of mechanisms, including the Community Emergency Services Manager, who will be a part of the working group. If they do have any concerns that they wish to raise, they can direct it through those channels. Alternatively, all brigades just so happen to be represented at the Bushfire Advisory Committee also.
Thank you.
I'll ask if anyone else wants to speak for the motion. I'm going to ask a question to the Director of Community Engagement. And I think you may have already asked it, but I'm just not 100% unequivocal in my mind. Has this alternate motion been socialised with any other brigades? Or is this the first time they would hear about it, is by either being at home tonight now watching this, or when Council sends out the minutes end of the week?
Are you referring to Councillor Bishop's alternate motion?
Sorry, yes, Director.
You'd need to direct that to Councillor Bishop. The first I was aware of it was this morning when it was sent through.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Bishop, are you able to answer that question? Is this the first time, like, do the other brigades know about this, or is this a...
Not to my knowledge, Mr. President.
Okay. My next question would be probably to you, Director of Community Engagement, or to the CEO. What is the urgency of this motion being passed? Is there any risks in deferring it for us to do potentially a PCF to actually find out what this means? I don't know if you can answer that, Director of Community Engagement, whether I can ask the CEO.
while there's no urgency for the integration working group to be established, I guess it's like anything, the sooner things can happen, the better. So it was our intention to hold the first meeting in November and December, and noting that the terms of reference didn't propose to have a meeting in January. Of the understanding that the station is ready to be open towards the end of this year, early next year. So given the significant changes to the emergency response landscape in the Shire, we would like to see the integration working group established as soon as possible. Without speaking for DFES, I think it's their position as well. There's obviously been a lot of talk that's been going on for the last 6 to 12 months in advance of the station coming online. So yes, there is obviously the option that we could take it to a PCF and discuss that membership further. I guess it's also would be open to council or DFES to bring the terms of reference back to council for them to be reconsidered if they didn't feel that the representation of the integration working group wasn't meeting the needs of all stakeholders. So hopefully that assists in your considerations.
Thank you, Director. And the second question I have is, when the Oakford Bushfire Brigade moves to their new place in Pony Place, my understanding is they'll then be outside of that area. Is that correct?
I would need to check them. If you can give me a few minutes, could check that.
Mr. President, my understanding is that's the case. They'll be outside the gazetted fire district when the new station's built.
Okay, thank you, Mr. CEO.
But the Director could check if you wanted to take a few minutes to check that.
Yeah, I think that's prudent.
Yes, it will be located outside the Metropolitan Gazetted Fire District.
Thank you, Director. I think I've called for someone else to speak for the motion. Does anyone else like to speak for the motion? Would you like to close, please, Councillor Bishop?
Yes, thanks, Mr. President. Look, to Councillor Mack's point around the Bushfire Advisory Committee meeting, I make the observation that representatives were present from all brigades and they supported a motion that clearly articulated the 3 brigades that were affected. I appreciate that in that motion it did say anyone else the Shire deems to be appropriate for the working group. The feedback that I have from stakeholders is that what is proposed is not appropriate for the working group. As Councillor Mack alluded to, it's dangerous to not consult the key stakeholders. So when you have a bushfire advisory committee who articulate 3 brigades who are clearly affected by the introduction of a career fire and rescue station, which is a good addition to the community, it's a well-needed service, there's absolutely no opposition to that, but you do have 3 brigades that are directly affected. We need to hear from them and ensure that as part of this working group with DFES and the Cardup Fire Station, that their voices are heard. I think I'll leave it as that. This is not an opportunity to put every brigade at a table in this local government area to have a conversation about what working with fire and rescue looks like. It's about integrating the career fire and rescue station with the areas of responsibility of 3 existing bushfire brigades. You know, these sorts of working groups didn't occur when Hope Valley or Armidale career fire and rescue stations, who we routinely work with in Serpentine Drought, we don't sit at a table with them and discuss. We're specifically getting to the point of the integration that affects 3 brigades. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bishop. All those in favour of the alternate motion? That's 4. All those against? Motion is carried 4-3. And I think we've already got reasons for difference. Can you just make sure you're happy with that, please, Councillor Bishop? Thank you. That brings on to agenda item 10.5.1. 10.5.1 is award request for tender RFT 06-2024 supply and delivery of Ferrocrete. That motion was passed on block. That then brings on to agenda item 10.5.2. That too was passed on block. 10.5.2 is rebates for home composting systems, and as mentioned, that was passed on block. That brings us to agenda item 10.5.3. 10.5.3, public electric vehicles EV charger at Shire Administration Building. Is there a councillor who'd like to move a motion in regards to this? Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Is that the officer's recommendation?
Happy to move officer's recommendation, thanks.
Thank you. Is there a councillor who's happy to second that? Thank you, Councillor Mazzini. Is there anyone opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. That brings us on to agenda item 10.6, which is confidential reports, which there are nil. Agenda item number 11 is urgent business, which there was 1, which was carried at the start of the meeting. That brings us on to agenda item number 12, which is elected member questions, of which notice has been given, which there is nil. That being the case, I declare the October Ordinary Council meeting closed at 9:53 p.m. and I thank the single member of the community who remained behind. Have a good night, everyone.